I'll use the gavel. Okay, this is the Wilmette Park District Committee of the Whole meeting. We're called to order at 6:07 PM. Can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Kozlowskis.
Here.
Commissioner Frazier.
Here.
Commissioner Murdoch.
Here.
Commissioner Goebel.
Here.
Commissioner Clark.
Here.
You have a quorum, and Commissioner Duffy will be arriving momentarily.
Very good. So we are, let's go, because of the agenda, we're going to be discussing the Park District Board Operations Manual. But before we do that, first I would like to know if anyone has any communications and correspondence. There was none in the packet. I don't think I had any. Don't know if anyone else had any communications.
Not on this subject, no.
None on this matter.
Yeah, exactly. No, not in this subject. Okay, I guess next is there a public comment. Would anyone like to say anything? No public comment. All right, then the first of the new business, we have the pleasure of administering the oath of office to our newest board member, Lindsay Anderson. Lindsay, would you mind stepping up front?
You could go in front.
In front, I'm sorry.
Very nice of you to have helpers. All right, raise your hand. I, Lindsay Anderson, having been appointed to the office of Commissioner of the Park District of Wilmette in the County of Cook, State of Illinois, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the State of Illinois and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of Commissioner according to the best of my ability. Congratulations and welcome. Take me with you.
That's so cute. So cute.
Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll go on to this other new business, which is continuing our review of the Park District Board Operations Manual. We last met on July 12th, and actually, I suppose before we start going back, we should maybe have a motion regarding the minutes of our last meeting.
I think these minutes have been approved at a prior board meeting.
I believe
These
they were.
included
Oh,
just
okay.
for
I
reference
okay.
for the discussion.
Okay, thank you,
Right.
thank you. I've been working and missed. Okay, so, but July 12th, I guess we met to speak about the board operations manual last time, and that time we pretty much basically went through and discussed the items that needed to be updated to comply with the Illinois state statutes. And we did that, and we went through that. We deferred a number of sections that really had a little bit more of a policy decision that we needed to discuss probably in more detail. And so we've deferred that, and that is what we are going to discuss today, are the sections that have more, that may be fine, but have more of a board policy aspect to them. So we're very grateful. We did receive a memo from our attorney, Andrew Payne, and he went through, as you know, and with each section, whether we had discussed it, whether we deferred it, whether, to what extent we were updating that. And there were still, I should say, though we updated, there were still a couple of policy decisions we made with that updating last time. But primarily it was regarding this statute, update the statute. So thank you for that memo. That was really very helpful. We are, in a sense, though, still, I guess, starting from the beginning of the manual and going through. And where there needs to now be, where it's already been discussed, we have a memo, and then we are going to go to those sections and discuss those sections that need some termination with more board policy. So let me just kind of go through. So sections 201, 202, 203, 204, 205, we've pretty much, 206, 207, even 208, so through to 209. We discussed, we have it updated, so, and they are settled.
And the only thing I would add, just to recognize, I think you did note earlier that Walter Keats had given us a fairly substantial memo with some suggestions. I think it started with, but he recommended some changes to the oath of office. I'm certainly comfortable with the oath of office as it is, but just to recognize that we have reviewed his memo, we're aware of his suggestions, and in some cases, we may adopt some of them, in some cases, we may not.
Yes, and right, and yes, and I was going to say, the oath of, we did discuss it, and it was decided at that point there would be no changes made to the oath of office.
Great.
So anyway, we are up to basically
209.
section 209, which refers to the board manual's order of business. And I think the comment is that it's, well, I think there's, it's not, to my, or at least my reading through, sort of the one thing, it applies to all of us generally for a board meeting. The question is, should we be applying this to the committee meetings as well? I would suggest that we are doing so in practice. There may, in some ways, that we do modify it for the committee meetings because we don't have, well, we don't really have financial reports other than for the golf committee. So we may need some language to allow for some flexibility. It seems to me that the other kind of issue, and when I first read this, and this was like a couple of months ago, I looked at it as saying this was the order that we needed to cover all these items.
If the minutes could reflect that Patrick Duffy has joined us now.
Reading through it a second time, I think it just says that they'll include that. It doesn't really specify an order, because originally I read it for an order. I'm not so sure it does say that. I think it just said that we need to include these items, but it might be good to have, it might be good to have some clarification that we can put, that these are the items in whatever order is deemed suitable, because we have, in practice, we have been changing public comment to come after we discuss some of the issues. So I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts about this section, or if you agree with what I've suggested, or if anyone has anything else.
I think my only comment is going back to Andrew's suggestion that we just indicate that there's some flexibility, that this isn't rigid. And again, recognizing that in some cases we do provide financial reports, for example, so just some language to state that it's not necessarily, all this is not required, that there's some flexibility. And Andrew, I don't know if you want to speak to it, if you have some language in mind for that.
Not necessarily. I mean, yeah, we can always include the.
May include, yeah, right.
Andrew, if you could come up, so we're broadcasting this. This is the only way people at home are going to hear you.
We can add language indicating that the list is not exclusive. We can add language indicating that it's flexible, that you can drop items, that it's not a requirement.
Yeah, and is everyone comfortable with extending this to the committees as well, which we are doing in practice?
As long as we use the word may include, then I think it's great.
My only suggestion for that is you might want to, for addressing the order of business for committees, you might want to include that in the committee section, because I think there's certainly going to be sections in the order of business that appears in 2.09 that would not really ever appear in a committee meeting. I mean, for example, executive director's report, I don't think you do that at the committee structure. So I think whatever language we come up with for order of business here, we can just copy and paste it, and when we're reworking the committee section, include the language on order of business there.
Yeah, that would probably be good. All right, the 210 we discussed and we reached a consensus. Now 211, on voting, we deferred it, and I have a question because I'm actually cannot recall or not sure why we deferred that. If anyone has any recollection, other the voting?
You had separated things into a category of what you thought
Yeah,
was
no,
policy and not,
yeah,
and I had,
yeah.
I'm looking back to my notes from July 12th, and you had, that was in the camp of, you said it was policy, so
I
I
think,
think that's why it was deferred.
well, I think there was also, and if you go back to Andrew's memo, I think there was some concern about what would we do in the event of a tie vote. And I think a couple of points on this. For the most part, I think it's fairly simple and straightforward. If there's a tie vote, it just means the motion fails.
That's-
End of
yes,
story.
I-
The only question was, is there ever a situation where having a tie vote would become a problem? And, you know, I think that's why that was out there, but I'm happy with leaving it just the way it is.
And then I may question why, not sure why, so I'm,
I think the only other point that was up for consideration was, potentially just requiring roll call votes for all, rather than having you have to decide for a particular
Oh,
vote, whether
that's
it
a good
requires a voice vote or a roll call vote. Perhaps adopting by policy just straight roll call so that there's never a question of what your practice is. That was also an important consideration because when we were in the virtual setting with meetings,
yes.
the amendments to the Open Meetings Act that allowed that required a roll call vote. So moving to just a standard roll call vote to avoid confusion and eliminate any potential challenge to the type of vote you took could be something that you might consider. Certainly, it's not required, but that was another reason I think we decided to defer it because that was kind of a policy decision for the board to chew on.
I mean, since this does call for a roll call vote, and I think that, I'm comfortable with the roll call vote, at any time.
And so I think, yeah, to that point and what Mike and Andrew have just stated, so this says a roll call vote shall be taken for the passage of ordinances and propositions to create liability or for expenditure and at any request of a commissioner. And I think what we're circling around is saying any vote should have a roll call.
vote, yeah.
That's correct.
So that would be striking or modifying the first part of that phrase to say a roll call vote shall be
Taken
taken.
for all board decisions. So that means a roll call vote when we adjourn. And I'm just, clarifying, because we've been doing it by voice vote, and it's just as long as
Yeah.
everyone's okay with that.
May I ask a question? Is there a reason other than consistency to make this change in taking action?
I don't think so. I think that's, as you said, when we were going on Zoom meetings, we were being required to do roll call votes, and we did. Now that we're back in person, we've done roll call votes for most major, but things like adjourning or recessing, we've done voice votes. And I think as for motions, have we done?
For the most part, we do a roll call vote,
yeah.
even before the pandemic. That's
Yeah.
generally what we did,
Yeah.
except for literally adjourning the meeting. That was pretty much the only
Yeah.
time we just said, "Bye." All those in favor say aye.
Yeah.
And one more question, sorry, is, are there any instances, actually, I think you answered it, but I think it is potentially nice to have the flexibility for adjourning. And we can always have a roll call vote. We can always decide to do that if we don't have to, though, right?
So if that's the case, so just leaving, everyone's comfortable leaving this section as it is, then it just, okay, that's good for me, with me. All right. 212, discuss, 213, 214, all right, 215, the president.
So I had one comment. I want to
Sure.
remove the male references.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
think that's
Right.
what he's
We'll do
going
that
to
throughout the
He's
entire
doing that
document.
through- yeah.
Yeah, that was a carryover from before that. I'm going to go through and update that everywhere. And then just to sort of kick off the discussion, just for purposes of background, the language in here that's relates to the president is more or less verbatim from the Park District Code. So it's just tracking the statutory requirements. So certainly there's no need to mess with this if you don't want to. If there's something you'd like to see added in that's otherwise consistent, you certainly could. But We don't need to reinvent the wheel here if you don't want to.
There was one inconsistency between, I believe, between 205 and what, and 205.
205 and 215, correct.
Because like who is, you know, I think 205 says two commissioners contact the secretary to call a meeting, and I think you said, you know, clarify that really the president, and here it's you know, they contact the president and the president shall call the meeting. And I think you indicated that that was more consistent with statute.
Yeah, so the language in 215 is the correct statutory language. The language in 2.05 is slightly off. It is the president who initiates the special meeting either at his own, on his own behest or at the request of two commissioners. In 205, we referenced the secretary doing it.
Yes.
Practically speaking, it's not that big of a deal, but since we're cleaning it up, I was just planning to
Okay.
address that when I clean up sort of the statutory updates.
Okay, good. The only other kind of comment that I had made says the president shall preside at all meetings of the board. We maybe talk, you know, I guess I'm saying like the full board, because to a committee meeting, is that in a sense is a meeting of the board? Would that president then be expected to preside at all the committee meetings and perhaps just have, I'm just thinking that perhaps it's best to just have some clarification.
I would say it differentiates between, this would be just regular or special board meetings of the full board. We would address who chairs committee meetings in the committee section. So it would be consistent with the statute and the park code to have the president chair all regular and special meetings of the full board.
Okay. Okay.
If we could go back briefly to 214, I'm sorry, in section C, there was a question that, Andrew, you had raised, whether the board has the authority to remove an elected officer. Did you ever clarify, did you research that?
Yeah, no, the short answer is you don't have that.
So we should
Well,
remove.
I shouldn't say that. There is one, the park code provides one limited mechanism to remove a commissioner, and that's for missing a set number of meetings based on an ordinance established by the board. I think that's in here.
I think that's in here.
Right, but
So
this is
that's-
referred to officers.
Right.
Specifically.
So there is no, so the only mechanism in the Park District world that allows the removal of anybody, officers or commissioners, is for missing meetings. So excluding that, you don't have the ability to.
So you'll clean this up
remove
too?
it. So I can clean that up. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
And in fact, there was recent legislation that passed over the summer regarding voluntary boards, and they clarified, again, to reiterate that even that language does not apply to elected or appointed officials. So for example, you've elected Lindsay to fill the vacancy. In 2 weeks, if you change your mind, you can't reverse your decision. And the legislature made sure to clarify that as well.
Oh, man.
Just using that as an example, sorry.
Very timely, great.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Next next is 216, which is the vice president. I guess we need to determine if, you know, and the board manual, the only duties is in the absence of the president. Do we want, you know, does he need additional duties, or do we have any additional, I guess that's Julia and Mike, that's kind of your.
I think the question is should something be defined here? And I think the second item is one that is whether or not the community relations reference
Well, I
should be
think-
there.
I think that's being taken out, the community relations.
Because it doesn't
Well, and
mean
it doesn't
so, right?
exist, but,
Right.
but I think it is that a synonym for the intergovernmental? And
I
so.
don't think
I
it
would say
is
so.
because they're
Steve
defined
says
differently.
yes.
Yeah, I think they're the same thing, but the terminology has changed over time.
Right.
But we have a committee,
But we have intergovernmental
So-
committee, so.
so we're just going to scratch that sentence, right?
I mean, I thought that's what we had decided, that we were taking that sentence out,
That makes sense.
because,
They certainly can still act in that role, but we just don't have to bind ourselves to something that doesn't make sense right now.
Can you confirm that the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee did indeed replace the Community Relations Committee? Because they do sound a little bit different.
They sound different to me too.
it sounds, yeah.
They indeed could be something different. I think of them as one in the same, but this is very old document, and Community Relations Committee nor Intergovernmental Committee has met in the 14 years.
I was going to say the intergovernmental hasn't met either, so.
Seems like we could.
And will.
It sounds like it's coming up now.
Yeah,
right?
there's
Yes.
an intergovernmental
This is
committee meeting in the
Scheduled.
works.
Right. Is it scheduled?
Right.
yet?
No,
Okay.
not scheduled yet.
Got it.
But in any case, the sentence, it seems like we all want to strike the sentence.
Yes.
Well, I guess I appreciate the spirit of it, that should there be some other intergovernmental type committee out there, that the vice president represents our board at that other,
But that's something that
Item.
we
I
can
think-
appoint in the moment.
But the
we
intergov-
sure could, but what I want to understand here before I move on is, we did create an intergovernmental committee that we have
three board
Ally
members
as the chair
yeah.
of right now. Whether it's met or not is irrelevant, but if we're suggesting that that's the same, then it's conflicting. I guess when I look at this, the spirit of it must have been, the president has these duties, this is an extra duty of the vice president, that they would represent the board to other village entities if that necessity arose.
That's how I read it.
I think that's the spirit of it.
So I don't know that that's necessarily exclusive. Maybe you could reword it to say something along those lines, that it's, the person could represent that, because otherwise we are not defining who could be that representative.
Well, we could also then add on the committees that the vice president shall be, we'd say that the vice president shall be a member of the intergovernmental committee. Rather
Well,
than,
and I think, so to your point, and to, build on what Kara said a moment ago, right now there is no duty of the vice president. It is simply a symbolic role. There was a practice of considering it as president-elect, but it was only a practice never documented. And so I question what the purpose of the vice presidential role is at all, if we don't define it. So I think there's an opportunity to define
But
it.
it's defined right here, Vice President, in the absence of the president, or in the event of his refusal or inability to act, shall be vested with the powers to perform the duties of the president. So I mean,
Yes.
it's clear what the vice president's role is.
It is stated right there, but
Yeah.
there is no other addition. There's no other additional responsibility associated with it, aside from that.
yeah.
Is that a
So I
problem?
think we have an
don't
opportunity to
necessarily-
either define, are there additional reasons for the
that's-
role, aside from stepping in, which I think is an important one? But is there anything else that this role should represent? Right now, we're saying no.
No, I mean, yeah,
Well,
what other duties are there?
I mean, traditionally, as I think Julia even said, the vice president has been the president-elect. And that was
So how often did that happen, Steve?
Where the vice president didn't become president?
So the statement was that their tradition has been, so is that true to form in the statement that the vice president always moves to the presidency?
I don't know if I can answer for all time, but I can answer for the time frame I've been here. There's one other instance because the person who was in the vice president role's term was expiring
Yeah.
at the time that the next vote for president would be, and they chose not to run for reelection.
Right.
So then we had both the president and the vice president move out
Move
of
on.
those officer
Daryl
roles.
and Shelley. So twice.
Daryl too?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Daryl
same
was
thing.
vice
Yeah, Daryl,
president.
same situation as
Right.
Shelley. I was thinking of
Yep.
Shelley. Correct.
So at least, how long have you been here?
14 years.
14 years, so in 14 years, two incidences, but it was when the vice president was not running for reelection. So,
It's been about half the time.
So why would we not want to do that? What are the reasons for not
Wanting to be-
formalizing the practice?
So I'm of the opinion that, just because you're vice president doesn't mean that you have the ability to lead the board. And as the board can say, you know what, there's a better leader to take control or lead the board, and we vote. I mean, it shouldn't be a given right. It should be a vote.
when you choose the president, and you choose the vice president, and I think the idea is that since you know that,
But you've got a
Your
role
president-elect
that you
and
perform
people-
as it. So if I'm elected vice president for this term, for a year or 2 years, whatever it is. During that 2-year term, you guys could get upset with some of the decisions I'm making. So then, am I automatically going to be president just because I was vice president and you guys don't like the way that I've been leading in the last 2 years?
Well, we do vote on the president. I mean,
That's but you're saying that we shouldn't vote on the president, that the vice president should automatically become the president.
I didn't say
No, I
that,
don't think
but
I said that.
I think if we depersonalize it, I think there's an opportunity to say, what is the responsibility of these roles? President, vice president, secretary, treasurer. I think that's the opportunity we have at hand, is do we want to define these differently or in practice?
But
A question of Andrew, if he's seen in sort of best practices or in other districts, if there have been additional guidance or definitions in the vice president role?
I'm not aware of anything that I can think of where somebody has taken policy of whoever is the current vice president becomes president and actually committed that to written policy. I'm certainly aware of districts that follow that informally as their adopted practice. On the other hand, I've seen some districts where the same person's been president for 20 years. So it really varies district to district, community to community. I would say kind of more generally in terms of trying to define the duties. One of the many areas where park districts differ from cities and villages is that there is, by design, not the same type of board figurehead like a mayor or a president. So really, other than running the meeting, which is kind of what's spelled out in the statute, what's in your board policy, the president, and the statute even said this, is treated the same as all the other commissioners. So really, the idea was to create an equal board, which is probably why you don't see a lot of explicit duties written down. And it really is, president runs the meeting, the vice president's there to step up in his absence, the secretary does secretary things, the treasurer does treasurer things, and then the rest is just kind of up to you guys to figure out as a group. So whatever that's worth.
Yeah, if I could jump in for a second.
And I'd like to say something after.
Yeah, I'll
as
let you
well.
go first. Go ahead.
Thank you. I feel we need to remember the spirit of this conversation, which we had from the start, which was to have a working document that we would not need to revisit annually. So I think in approaching any of these questions, to be so specific is limiting us and will cause us to have to come back to it more frequently than is necessary. So I'd like to keep that in mind. I think how it's stated here gives us flexibility, and I agree if we want to further define the roles, that's something that will need to be carried throughout. I think that, in my opinion, to state that we're going to immediately move the vice president to the president role takes away the votes of the oncoming board members, which is not in the spirit of our board.
And I was going to pick up on that if you take a look, not so much what happened this past year, but you go back a couple of years beforehand, we had 4 new board members. And I personally think that that board did our group a disservice by not giving us some direction, some signaling, because they named someone as vice president whom they knew wasn't going to ultimately serve as president. But I think that were we to set a more formal expectation, I think to some extent, we're then imposing on another group, another elected body. I mean, look what's happened with this group over the last couple of years. We had 4 new commissioners 2.5 years ago. We had 3 new commissioners and now 4 new commissioners this time around again. And so I think any kind of practice would be problematic. On the other hand, I think in terms of this conversation, we might want to go back to the discussion about the president, and we might want to talk about whether, going back to Andrew's comment, it didn't occur to me until you said it right now, should there be term limits for the president? To some extent, we had a past practice where presidents served for 2 years, and then a majority of the new commissioners came in, not able to, for whatever reason, decide on a new person. We asked the current president to serve a 3rd year, and that deviated from past practices. Do we want to have any conversations about whether that term should be limited to 2 years or 1 year or whatever the case may be? But in terms of any kind of an ascension of the vice president to the president, given that often that will happen after an election where new people are in the room, I just think it's challenging to formalize and pose something that I think signaling can and does happen, and that can be helpful. And sometimes it's happened and sometimes it hasn't. But I don't know if we want to go back to the discussion about the president, whether we want to limit a president's term. You know, in theory, we could have a president who could serve for a longer period of time. That hasn't been our practice, but you say other park districts do. I don't think that's in our best interest.
Well, we could possibly, I've noticed in other areas of the manual that there is sort of like suggestions are made, or it's kind of that, something is done, especially I think with the executive director, it's, one statement here, it's effective executive director board relationship is a delicate balance. So, I mean, there's some like almost editorializing. We could include that it is, the sort of the understanding that in the normal course of business, the vice president will be voted on for the presidency. We don't have to make it, a set rule, but sort of indicate that the understanding is that generally the vice president will assume the responsibilities of the president at the end of the president's term. And I don't know, and that does raise the question, do we do a term limit for the president? I wouldn't.
But what happens in, where we are today, if the current president has 2 years and the vice president is the vice president during that term, and they're both up for reelection and neither of them get reelected, then the vice president can't assume the presidency.
No, I know, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying with the understanding, because that there are situations where, let's say, the vice president isn't going to run again, where this isn't going to happen, but that's where I'm saying that it's not by requiring it. or
I'm with
setting it
Ally
up,
on
but
keep
sort of
it
just to
loose
generalize.
and I'm with Ally. Keep
Yeah,
it
I was going to
loose
say the same. I
and
appreciate
just-
her guidance.
yeah.
Let's keep it to a document that will survive us well and not require updates in situations that we could predict might, like a scenario like someone just described. Yeah, then they're going to have to call Andrew, what should we do about this? I think that a conversation around who should be the president, there will be dialogue at each time that comes up, of course, at each new time to elect the president, as there should be, and that leaves that board the space to have that dialogue in the public eye, as would normally be done. And certainly, that would be appropriate to reference past practice has been this, and to have that dialogue each time, but binding ourselves to it feels a little bit uncomfortable to me. And to take us back, I feel like we're opening up a lot of cans at once here, but the original question was, should we strike that second sentence on the vice president role? It sounds like in the spirit of keeping this broad and flexible, it's not serving us right now, and so I don't see a concern with removing it if we were going to come back to that. And then in terms of adding future language to it, I'm comfortable with the language as it's written, as Andrew explained to us, that this is what's pretty standard boilerplate from the Park District Manual, and I'm comfortable with leaving that on our document and then leaving the interpretation open for conversations in the future. That's what I would
Based on
suggest.
our debate, I'm comfortable as well.
I had an additional thought on this, and I forget the language that's used for other committees, but the president is listed as a
Ex officio member.
ex officio member. I would be interested, without having to bind the vice president to committing one of their two committees as the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, what if they become, per this document, to further define the role, an ex officio member of that committee? So that they're not, is that possible?
Since committees are created when there's a new president, I don't think it can become.
Okay.
Unless, except to the extent that a vice president has to take over the role of the president mid-term because of, inability to act, and perhaps then it could be, but otherwise, when we have a new president, we have new committees, and so it should not
Right.
become an issue. But I will say that I'm just going, I wasn't going to bring this up right now, but Kara's comments kind of brought us into it. I do think, keep in mind, we should consider setting up a schedule of reviewing the board manual, instead of like this year, it's been 10 years, and it's so far out of date statutorily and policy that we should be, we may want to include in there a a regular review of
Some cadence of
documents
review.
to,
Yeah.
you know.
I believe there's a
provide-
section later in the manual that addresses periodic review, and that was one of the things
I thought there
think
was-
we highlighted was to come up with a reasonable time period.
It was ambiguous, so
I
to
think it was-
suggest a
yeah.
specific time.
Yeah,
And-
that's what I'm saying.
And
yeah.
what would your recommendation be? Is that a
I was
six-year
going to ask
process?
Steve,
Is it-
isn't there a,
Last section.
either through PDERMA or some of the various accreditation processes?
The
Isn't there like a
accreditation.
recommended year, like every 3 years or every
I think
5
it's-
years or?
One of those two, I'd have to
Yeah.
look to see what it is, but it's through the state accreditation.
Yeah, so I
So
would,
I would suggest that we could certainly determine whether it's 3 or 5, but I would suggest tying it to that just
Yes.
because it makes some sense. And
Sounds great.
Yes.
Good.
yeah, all right, very good. All right, so then we have, okay, so we reached, made a consensus on 216, 217.
I'm sorry, on 216, are we striking that second sentence?
Yes,
Is
I-
that-
yes, I
okay,
know,
just
yes,
wanna
that
clarify.
has been striking that. Reference to the community relations. 217, the secretary. I guess my only, well, I guess, and this, I guess is partly Steve's, like, are the duties that are set there correct, accurate? Do they need to be updated in any way? The other kind of question I have that I circulated, do we need, you know, to my knowledge, we've never had an assistant secretary. Do we need that? I don't seem to think we need that.
We do have an assistant
Yeah, we
secretary.
appoint
appoint one every
the
time.
executive
Oh,
administrative
okay.
assistant,
Yep.
so Catherine in the
Okay.
current.
Yeah.
All right, so then we'll leave that. The only other thing I circled was that he shall act under the general supervision of the president and board of commissioners. Do we really, I mean, should it just be the board of commissioners? Why, why do we have saying that he'll be under the president?
I agree with that.
And just.
I don't
should
think
be
there's
the
any
board of
reason for that
commissioners?
language.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should retain the first part of that sentence that reads, "The secretary need not be a member of the board and may be a
Yes.
paid employee." I mean, it also could be an outside third party, but you don't see that very often.
Yeah.
But I would strike the "and shall act under" through the end of the sentence would be my recommendation.
Great.
Okay, so then we have to treasurer and, so section 218, treasurer, I guess I feel that this to me is a little bit more vague because of, I think we should probably parallel it more to secretary and also to provide that the treasurer may be a paid employee because of the of the park district, because that's actually how we are doing it in practice.
Yeah, I guess just a question, because, right, you rightly point out that one is we call out that the person can be a paid employee, the other time it's silent. If it's silent, that doesn't restrict. Why are we calling it out in one case and not calling it out in the other? I think we should be consistent.
Right. I think it was just inconsistent draftsmanship.
Yep.
The statutory language that addresses the duties of secretary and treasurer are pretty much verbatim.
Yeah.
So I think just.
Let's make 'em consistent.
consistent
Great.
with the statute. And I think the only other clarification is that, that the treasurers and secretaries do not have to be, I mean, it could be an employee, it could be a board member, but it also could be a third party.
Okay.
So that, basically, we'll just track the statutory language. That's the easiest way to say it.
Okay.
So now we get to
We're on to 2.19.
2.19,
Right.
executive director. And again, I feel like that's some of this is Steve's, does it accurately set, what's set out there, does that accurately reflect your duties as executive director? The other, and, they list several superintendents, I don't know if those are accurate, like, is there a
They're not
superintendent
currently.
of facility? So we need to clarify,
Does it make sense
Right
to
there.
remove the specific superintendent's just reference of a class of employee? Because that does change from time to time.
Well, and
Yeah.
it does say, and such other employees as are required. So I think these are examples rather than firm definitions or requirements of roles.
I would, as I read it, I would look at it the opposite. I think it's defining these specific positions, and the superintendent of facilities no longer exists. I think that's why. I mean, we're splitting hairs, but
Should we have one, though?
should we have a superintendent of facilities? We actually have someone who, and Steve, you should speak to this rather than me, but we have someone who fulfills those duties, but the title is now different. Is that correct?
Correct. So the superintendent of facilities, once upon a time, oversaw Centennial Golf and pretty much Centennial and Golf. That has now been merged into the superintendent of recreation, which is also what it once was 30 years ago, too. So it is, the structure has moved in kind of a pendulum sort of manner.
I think if we're going to define roles, I'd like to soften the language so it can be broadly representative of the types of roles. We don't have, for example, a superintendent of community relations, but we might want. And so as titles change, or in the example of superintendent of recreation, and facilities changing, I'd want this to be open and expansive enough to accommodate what roles you think you need.
Because we could say something like the employment of such superintendents as become necessary for the proper operation of the,
That makes sense to me,
Yeah, so
certainly.
it's.
That's a good idea.
Employment of superintendents. I mean, I think the spirit of this is, what's he doing? He's doing the maintenance, the construction and repair, the employment of fill in the blank. So I think the superintendent's being the highest chain that reports to Steve.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of would say superintendents, because such other employees
And
kind
other
of,
such employees.
as are required, kind of strikes me as being lowered, a little bit lower on the hierarchy of.
Andrew, do you feel comfortable with what we're asking you?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense.
Great.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
And then you had commented on the last line, he shall be an unofficial member of all park committees. You say that he's a staff member, so
Right.
you recommend just striking that
I
line?
think so.
Or okay,
Yeah, it's not
great.
consistent with practice.
Do we want, I mean, in practice, I know it, do we want to specify that the executive director shall be the superintendent and, maybe have an opt-out and accept unless the board decides otherwise? I mean.
She'll be a super, I'm not.
I'm not clear either.
Shall be the secretary. It means
Oh.
that the executive shall be the secretaries, in cases unless the board
Again,
chooses otherwise, or?
in the spirit of what you're doing in the other sections, I think my
Keep it
opinion would
flexible.
always be maintain flexibility for the board and don't prescribe a certain way to do it because things can always change. I would say with the clients that I work with, it's probably an even split. Many executive directors serve as secretary, but also there's plenty of boards that just have one of the commissioners serve as secretary and then they delegate to a reporting secretary. My opinion would be don't limit
Okay.
yourselves. Keep it as flexible as possible.
Okay. Okay. And then we get to the requirement that the executive director live in the village of Wilmette. And I think your advice is that it's not a legal requirement and probably is not a good idea because it can limit the, if Steve should move on of executive directors. And I'm happy with striking this.
So I have a different perspective, so I'd love to hear what actually both of you think, because I was actually involved when we hired Steve when he didn't live here. And I think the document clearly states that the board can grant an exception. In this case, we were clearly going to hire Steve whether he moved here or not. And so I don't think there's anything that prevents us from hiring an executive director who doesn't live here. What I like about this clause is it clearly states that we believe the executive director living in the community is a good thing. It's a priority for us and it's a value, and so people should think a little bit more if it's not going to be the case. In fact, not to reveal any state secrets, Steve, but we actually came to Steve and provided him a financial inducement to come into the town, and it was the best money we ever spent because, he's such an integral part of this community. So I like that this language is here because it indicates that this is a value of ours. We want our executive director to be in town. We're not saying that we can't hire someone who isn't, but it's saying that this is a value of ours. So I like it in here.
I tend to support that as well. I think it's consistent with there are certainly plenty of other organizations or school districts that require similar residency for the sake of knowledge and, investment in the community in which they're serving. And so given that it gives us, there's always an option with the waiver, which the board would then vote on when the situation came. I do like that it speaks to our commitment to the public that it's not a commute in leading one of the highest places they put their tax dollars, right?
I like it as well. I think one thing we may need to consider, not necessarily in the policy, but as property values continue to rise, salaries must rise in accordance for an executive director to be able to afford to live here. So I think that that's something that we should, as a board and probably future boards, should keep in mind. I don't think it should be in the policy per se, but we need to be mindful of this guidance has downstream impact as well.
Not only that.
That's a great point.
Property.
Cost of living.
Price is the tax burden.
Tax burden, sure. On this paragraph, though, what I find is interesting is that this is clearly defined. Nowhere in this document is it clearly defined about commissioners living in the district.
That goes back to the state statute,
Yeah, I
though,
mean,
correct?
that's a statutory requirement,
Right.
so my guess is, again, a decision must have been made at some point, how much of the statute do you copy and paste into the board manual? That was something that didn't get carried forward. You could certainly add it if you felt it's necessary, but whether it's in here or not, it doesn't change what the law says, so. And this would be something that's not requiring the director to either reside in the village or move to the village within 6 months of hire. That's not something that's required by law, so obviously that would, to require something like that would necessitate it being
I guess
included in the
that's-
manual.
So that's a question, even if we leave this, do we want to do we still want that 6 month that they have to move in within 6 months?
I think it's reasonable.
But it's also, again, it can be waived, right? I mean, the 6 months can be
It
waived.
can be waived.
So it just gives us flexibility. It's, I like the way that Mike described it as, we want, it's intent, but it's not necessary. It adds value to the role if they are here, but we understand if there are other circumstances that prevent it.
Oh, okay.
So I'm hearing paragraph as is. We're comfortable? What about the issue if the state statute is not followed for commissioners? Do we want to put language in to cure that?
May I ask a question on that? I know residency is required to run for office and to be appointed. Is the question about, should you move outside of Wilmette during your term? Is that the question?
I think that's a good part of it.
And does state law does not require residency throughout the term?
No, it does.
It does. Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you cease to be a resident of Wilmette or the corporate boundaries of the park district, then you can no longer serve as park commissioner.
Then my recommendation would be to not duplicate that
What's in there?
in the bylaws if it's already in state law. Or thought.
I don't
Sorry,
mean
not
to
recommendation.
muddy the conversation, but aren't there some gray areas for temporary relocation with the intent to move back into town?
Yeah,
house
so
under
then,
renovation,
yeah, I
things
mean,
like that?
it's leaving, well, yeah, I oversimplified that. If you cease to be a resident, that implies you've left with the intent to abandon. I sort of skipped over that. So yes, it would be possible, the famous case of Rahm Emanuel serving in DC. He left the Chicagoland area. When he came back to run for mayor, he had not been here for the requisite amount of time. He was challenged, went up to the state Supreme Court, and they said, well, it was a temporary absence for a variety of reasons. He never had the intent to leave. He stayed on the ballot. That's an example of that. So there is a lot of gray, but all of this is covered in the election code, in the Parks District Code, and in the thousands of cases that, particularly on the election side of things, that interpret that language. So, again, if that's something that people feel strongly about, in terms of qualifications, we could certainly find somewhere to add a paragraph. But that's obviously up to you.
I think we could have some unintended consequences, though. So just a little bit, for my personal situation, I sold my primary residence unexpectedly about a year ago. When I say unexpectedly, obviously I didn't, my wife wanted to, and so we did. And at that point, I didn't know exactly where I was going to be for a period of time. I bought another house. I was able to convince her to allow me to rehab it and move in, and that was all good. Had that not been the case, we own other houses in other places. We might have lived someplace else while we were looking for a place. I had every intention of remaining in the village, but that might muddy the water. In that case, it's a little bit complicated because obviously I chose to sell my house. So I had some control over that. But let's think about a commissioner who's a tenant. Lease comes up, forced to move. Right now, rental property in this community is very difficult to find. Are we saying that if someone who is forced out of his or her home through no fault of his or her own is required to resign if they can't find another home temporarily in the district? I just think we want to be careful about that. I think the state does, the state statute, and we talked a lot about this in the context of the vacancy that came up a little while ago. Intent can be somewhat complicated, and to some extent, it's in the eye of the beholder. As we try to define this more carefully, I think there could be some unintended consequences. Again, in my case, I chose to sell, so it was a choice, but for a tenant, they don't always have the ability to stay. So I think we want to be careful about that.
I think it might be as simple as saying, choosing to copy the current statute into ours requires us to update when that code might change. So knowing that state code and election codes would govern, should they make any modifications or amendments to that as years go by, we would be covered by that if we allow that to govern. But if we put it in here, I think there were a few other places when we went through this review previously where Andrew told us, oh, well, that's because the code has changed since, but it had been duplicated into the manual, and we found ourselves having to update it. So back to Ally's point at the beginning about keeping this as, clean as possible for, not because we're just trying to avoid work in any way. I still agree with Cecilia's point about regular review cycles would be very healthy, but let's just let the code that governs govern would be my recommendation.
So then would we say the requirements are governed by state code as in effect at the time of, I don't know what the specific language would be, but therefore we can just say it must align with the state or park district code?
Yeah, I mean, I was just flipping through it while you guys were all discussing. I don't see a specific section that addresses sort of commissioners generally. We've got officers and officials, and then we've got the individual officers broken down. So to add something like that, we would just need to create a new section, and we could then put in a sentence.
We'd have to have, I think, maybe a compelling reason, though, because then why are we not referencing other areas of state law that govern our body, but we're only referencing that one?
Well, no, I think we could reference we must align with all state
Okay.
and park district code.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I don't want to specifically call this out,
Okay.
but I
To the
noted
extent
it
that-
was so explicitly described for one and not for another.
Or say, to the extent that the contents of the board manual conflict with the state law will govern, will rule. So, but I think it may be helpful to have a reminder to people that we're ultimately, what our actions are governed by state statute.
It could probably, in the very beginning under government, where it talks about the government and it's governed by the commissioners, we could probably add that sentence pretty easily right there that just talks about operations and the commissions are governed by applicable state laws. I can come up with something that sounds a little bit better than that, but.
Sounds good. Great.
I think that works, that's great.
Okay. So then we go, section 2220 and 221, we deferred, but I'm not really sure why, again, why.
There's nothing there to change.
There's nothing there to change, so,
Andrew, you want some more latitude in your role as attorney? Some more,
I'm good.
influence, or-
Typical time for meetings after 6 PM.
And Cecilia, just to clarify, my sense was we didn't defer these. There were certain topics where
You mean
changes
just
were
that-
discussed that were
that we-
statutory in nature.
So we may
We
just
ran
jump
through
over,
those.
yeah.
So for somewhere there was nothing to change, we just sort of glossed over them, which
okay.
is what we're doing
Yeah.
here, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's section 222. The idea, suggestion is to clarify language on payment as the use of may and shall. Clarify that this doesn't employ the regular employee salaries, yes. So, so these would be for employees that are like employed directly by the board, is that what?
Yeah, I think given its location in here, and the fact that it references compensation of officers and employees, that the intent of the language is that the board, if you're employing someone to serve as
Treasurer.
an officer, a treasurer, a secretary who's not a board member who can't receive compensation, that it's your job as the board to set the compensation for that individual. But I think it's written to me in a generic enough way that someone could look at that and say, we just want to clarify that your ability to set compensation is specific to the treasurer and the secretary, and I guess to Steve. But beyond that, Steve is the executive director, subject to your budget approvals, sets the compensation for district employees.
Yes. Okay, So, so basically, you feel you can clean this
Yes.
section up? Okay, good. Hey,
Vacancies, here we go.
vacancy, yes, 223. There are portions of this section that do need to be cleaned up to comply with state statute, and that's, there it is. I guess and I'm hoping that I've talked about this with you, with Steve. I feel like the way it talks about when vacancies or how they're filled, that there is a gap of time, but the newer statute may address that, and that may not exist anymore. But I suppose then, if that's, and we'll see what that is the case. However, we still have the issue of how do we fill a vacancy, because this sets out a procedure, and there's been a lot of different talk about, should we have some other type of procedure? Should we consider, something else? So I don't know if anyone feels, I personally, after now, especially going through this with Lindsay, I am very comfortable with the procedure that is set out here, but I don't know if anyone else might like to weigh in on that, or feel that there might be some other option.
Well, and if we can jump in, I mean, I think the other possibility that was considered was following more of the villages model, where I should clarify that in the most recent election, the village president indicated that she appointed the next highest vote getter. There's obviously been village practices in the past where they didn't appoint that way, but there was some discussion about that. My feeling is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we've been through it. I think it worked exceptionally well, and I like it the way it is, but if other people want to consider changing it, let's talk about it.
And I guess part of what, we can even see from this most recent one, that going through the election, the next highest vote getters didn't apply. They weren't, so apparently, so I feel like that having this is that you find out people who are actually still interested in this vacancy. So I'm with you. I'm happy with the procedure and that's set out here. And I think one of your comments was, do you actually need to set a procedure out in the manual? I kind of felt like it's comforting to the residents to know what the procedure is.
It gave us some structure.
Yeah.
But again, it does sort of go counter to all these other conversations we're having about maximum flexibility.
Yeah.
I like it the way it is, but that is a departure from what we're doing elsewhere. So I think we should just all weigh in and decide what we do.
Andrew, were you about to say
Yeah,
something?
I would just say, I mean, it is striking a balance. I certainly, consistent with what you guys have been doing so far, I wouldn't recommend adopting a policy that points to a specific person with a predetermined outcome, like appointing the next closest vote getter, and there's a variety of reasons why. But I also think nothing about this practice ties your hands to a particular candidate. All it does really do is guarantee that there's some level of transparency. You guys could always expand, add to it, and go further. But, just my only comment as the devil's advocate would be, again, this does force you to follow a specific process, which under certain circumstances, perhaps you would prefer not to have to do that. But this isn't that onerous of a process to begin with. So again, that's something for you guys to decide.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it as is.
Yes,
Okay, so we leave it as is.
I think Lindsay likes it too.
And then you'll check the dates, 28 months, and
The 24, I think the only number that changed, I think it's now, and I don't know what the relevance is, I think it's 92 days instead of 88. So.
right, so just anyway, you'll make sure that
Yeah.
we don't, okay, great, good.
Okay, so no, section 2.24.
I guess
Yes.
one more thing to
Yes.
cover that actually is fairly important. In the middle section, so this talks about your ability to remove commissioners. This would be that document. And so we should talk about whether you're comfortable with the parameters that are laid out here for potential removal of a commissioner for failure to attend meetings and otherwise participate in board business.
So a minimum of 12 regular special or committee meetings in any 12-month period. That's what you're referring to?
Yeah, so the base for a period of 3 consecutive calendar months or a total of 12 in a 12-month period.
It seems, I mean, you're
That
coming
seems
to
generous.
miss 12 meetings, yeah.
God,
You're
considering
not
how
doing your
many,
job.
how many
Yeah,
weeks, I mean.
Right.
Skipping 3 months seems like a pretty kind of reasonable, like, it's got to be, you really got to be trying at that point. 12 or 12, I mean, that seems like a really high number to say.
But what you're counting are regular, special, or committee. So, I mean, I'm on 4 committees and the board, so I have what, 7 meetings in a month when we have
2 vacations could knock
board
you
of the
out.
whole. I mean, yeah, if I'm out of town for 2 weeks, I can be voted off. I mean,
But
it
it's
feels like
neglect
Well, I don't
to
think- but I'm-
attend, right?
yeah.
It's not just, like, if you're ill, that's
Yeah.
not neglectful, so.
Well, and I want to point out, it also says, said office may be declared vacant by the board. So if someone has a medical situation or whatever, it's not a requirement. And so I
Yeah,
think the
and-
language is good the way it's written. because of
Okay,
that.
I just wanted to make sure, since we're here, if you're comfortable with those numbers, and it sounds like generally you are, and it allows you the flexibility, and it has to be fairly egregious to trigger this, and even
Good.
then, you're not obligated to do it. But it is a drastic step to remove an elected official, so perhaps it is a good idea to keep the number pretty high. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so then we're done with section 2.23, right? Okay, section 2.24, primary functions of the park board. Okay, I have, I'm trying to read what your comments, okay, so one of it is that make sure, okay. my
Point
first-
E deals specifically with how frequently the review is, so you're going to put some language in there about that.
So I'm really just looking right now at the introductory language, and it says, although the park board is empowered to make all decisions affecting the operation of the district. I mean, really?
I think that's strong.
That's basically, I mean, that's what the executive director does, and I feel like that gives the board the ability to usurp the executive director, and I guess I feel like it's too much. We shouldn't be doing this.
And I would
do
say if you
think
read the next
The
sentence.
second
that's-
sentence softens it, which I
Well,
like,
yes, I know.
right?
That's-
Although it shall normally exercise by establishing policy and reviewing implementation of
I
policy.
guess my feeling is we could just, primary functions, the park board shall normally just take that out. Take it out, because I don't know, have we ever actually done this? But
I would just say empowered is an important word because we need that power should the executive director be not performing.
then we fire
And during that firing process, or maybe there's a personnel process, or maybe there's a discipline, or maybe there's an investigation, whatever that is, if something goes wrong, we need the ability to have that be empowered to do that. It doesn't mean that we are directed to make decisions of operations. We're just empowered should something go wrong. And so I think that's important.
Okay, I mean, I just think partly, do we act together? Do we act as one? Does one person making that? I mean, it just seems very vague that we have to then meet and make a decision that we're going to do something regarding the running of the park district, and that just seems to be getting kind of clunky and difficult, and we sometimes disagree on things, and is something that may need more recent. So I just kind of feel that giving that power probably is not really a good idea, but that we're here to set policy decisions, and the executive director is here to implement those policy directions. So that's just sort of the way I kind of looked and felt like that. But
Andrew, do you have a feeling on this one?
Yeah, I think we could certainly improve how it's written, but I think, to Julia's point, the second half of the first sentence is, to me, an accurate statement of
yes,
the purpose of the board and the power of the board, which is you control the district by establishing policy and reviewing how that policy is implemented by the staff people. And then it goes on to provide a list of other specific functions relating to budgets and taxes and stuff like that. But I think we can clean up, and if there's certain words you want to include, we can certainly do that. But I would just probably do away with this concept of making all decisions, because that implies a level of micromanagement that I don't think any of us want. And it gets in the way of Steve and his staff from doing their jobs.
I would disagree, if I can jump in. I think that this is not about how we should operate. This is speaking to our power. So if we are deciding to give away power, then we should change this portion of the sentence. I don't think it's speaking to how we should practice. It's not directing us to make decisions affecting operations. But if something goes wrong, it is the power and authority of the board to step in and have that ability. So it would be directly taking away power from the board. So I think this is a big, important piece. It's not just about how we should operate. And I think we all agree on that, but
Can you confirm, Andrew, that if we remove that sentence, that it does take away our power to act in that capacity?
I wouldn't think so, but I think, to Lindsay's point, I think this is why it's important to compare the job duties of the executive director to the functions and the description of the park board to make sure we have consistency. Because, for example, if in the powers and duties of the executive director, you delegate to him or her the ability to hire, fire, and manage staff, then you wouldn't and shouldn't have the ability to intervene on day-to-day employment issues at the district. Could there be a special circumstance that might require the director to come to you? Yes, but if you delegate that power to him, but then you take it back in another place, you're creating an inconsistency in the document, which creates then a problem if the commissioner tries to unilaterally get involved in an employment decision. So to Lindsay's point, yes, you don't have to give it away, but I think what you want to try to do is find some level of cohesion between section 219 and section, what are we on here, 224, so that if you are delegating something, you're not then stepping all over it at the board level as well.
Well, I think there have been commissioners who have tried to step in and make decisions that really belong to staff, and I guess I am not. I'm not comfortable with that, so I don't really want to see the board being empowered to do that in that way.
Cecilia, is this a notion of board role and activism versus advisory? Like, it should-
Yes, I
kind
think
of a
that's more that-
philosophical
I feel that
continuum?
Yes, that the board's role is more advisory, setting policy versus being involved in the actual running of the park district.
You have a thought?
So that's.
I think that's a great point. So we have to have a balance here, and it's a great point that there could be board members who inappropriately feel empowered to step in and affect operations, and we don't want that. But I also think that we have to be prepared for and empowered in all situations. So if something occurs that is problematic with an executive director, and say, there's an investigation, say there are ethical violations, say there's something legal, there's fraud, say there's mismanagement. It's not always a simple firing and decision to act. There may be an investigation, there may be questions, but we as a board need the ability to step in and have to be empowered to make decisions. And we as a board, I think, will need to make sure that we have that balance. And for those board members who do feel empowered inappropriately to step in, not in those circumstances, I think we as a board need to balance that. So it's absolutely about balance, but I do think.
Oh, no, I'm saying if there's such a thing, if there's an investigation, so to say the executive director is still in the position of executive director, I'm not so sure then what the board would be doing, because then it's the executive director may be under investigation, but the executive director is still the executive director and still is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the park district. And if it gets to a point where the executive director is found to have committed an ethical violation, or, I mean, then it's the duty of the board to fire that executive director, and then the superintendent or the next level down will continue to manage the operations of the park district. But I guess this is where my concern is. I don't think it's the board's role to step in and to be empowered to do so. I don't think that's the role of the board. It's not, not what they should be doing. And honestly, even if we take it out, there's still maybe someone who will be.
But I guess, Cecilia, you talk about an individual member. None of this talks about board members. This is the board acting as a board. So I would go back to Lindsay's point about empowerment and responsibility. I'm comfortable with the language the way it reads now. I don't see the need for a change.
I
But
agree.
I think we should all sort of weigh in and then see where we go.
Just reading this, are we hung up on this concept of the operations data? I mean, can we accomplish what everybody wants by just striking that and just saying that the board is empowered to make all decisions affecting the district? It shall normally exercise those powers by establishing policy. That way we're not tripped up on operations, which seems to be what we're worried about.
But, I mean,
That's a good clarification. I
It's
think
still
that's
implied
interesting.
in that. I mean,
Right.
it still happens then.
Broadening it.
Yeah, it really, it makes it, that's a better point. It broadens it then, because now it's more vague.
Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
Andrew, you're earning your money tonight.
Now, are there other clauses within 2.24 that we need to review? Because I know you did have several notes, Andrew.
Yeah.
So again, to E, I think we said that we're going to have more than just a generically periodic review, and you're going to take a look at what's done elsewhere, even go to 3 or 5 years. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yeah, I can confirm whatever that number is,
Great.
and we can plug that in. And then I would also, while we're here, I would suggest that we consider expanding that beyond just the personnel policies and include, certainly the board operations manual. I'm not
Great.
sure what other manuals you have, Steve. Are those the two big ones? Maybe the park user, the conduct ordinance? Put that in there?
Those three.
Those three?
Right.
Okay.
So let's get all 3 of those in there.
Okay.
Good.
I'm trying to remember when the last time is that we reviewed personnel policies. I don't know.
2014,
Okay, before my time.
yeah.
After my time.
So what's the magic number? 5 years, 4 years?
He's going to look.
Yeah.
We're
Just
gonna,
gonna look.
there's various accreditation programs out there that, and I can't remember off the top of my head if it's 3 or 5, but we'll confirm, and whichever one it is, that's what we'll use.
I do want to bump up to item D. In a previous closed session meeting, Ally posed a question of, around executive director employment, what is the common practice of using either employment agreements or employment at will, or what is the practice? And I just think it would be good for us to have some data on this.
That's a great point. Thank you.
What other districts do, and forgive me for pointing out that you brought
Right.
that up previously.
Right.
I want to give you credit where credit's due. I think it'd be interesting to understand what do common districts do commonly. Is it appropriate to have an employment agreement, or should we define that it's an employed at will, or what are some other practices?
I would say historically, it was a mixed bag. There was a lot of just handshake deals with no contracts at all, but I would say in the last 10-plus years, it's moved to almost exclusively employment contracts.
I wasn't expecting exclusively.
Yeah, I mean, not quite, pretty close. There's a few who don't. Steve is one, but I would say of the, I don't know, we have 25 or 26 park districts we work with currently. I think all but 2 or 3 have employment contracts with their directors. My opinion on it is I think it's a good idea, and it protects both the district and the executive director. You can put all sorts of stuff in there, but I mean, the biggest things is it provides for continuity. So if Steve were to decide at some point he wanted to pursue another opportunity, you would build in some notice so that you guys aren't left hanging high and dry. And similarly, if you guys decided not for performance or just you wanted to go in a different direction, it also provides some protection for Steve that he's not going to get the rug pulled out from under him. It used to get sort of crazy with what's the word I'm looking for? Severance packages and buyouts at the end of contracts, but a couple years ago, the legislature corrected that, and that's limited now to, I think, the maximum is like 5 months of salary. So normally the contracts you see are pretty even-handed, and it just puts everybody on a level playing field, and it protects either party from surprising the other party.
Do we want to, again, I know we're trying to keep this clean, but build in, that the hiring and specifying within, just saying that under an employment contract, so employ an executive director under an employment contract as its chief executive officer, as opposed to just saying employing it?
You could certainly do that. Again, I might argue here again to leave it flexible. There might be a reason why perhaps Steve's not interested in a contract. Perhaps the current board isn't interested in offering Steve a contract. So to require it, if you deviate, if you lock yourself in this document and then for some reason the circumstances dictate doing something different, technically you're violating your own policy, which means you either just do it anyway, which isn't a great practice, or you have to go in and amend your policy, which is kind of what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to build in maximum flexibility. So I would probably just say keep it as is, but certainly as a practice, if that's something the board is interested in doing, then by all means pursue it.
Yeah, why don't we keep it as it is, but we as a group should discuss that. I think there've been some conversations with some of us. Lindsay will get you up to speed, and I think that's something we're talking about for the coming year. So
And
let's all get together and make a decision and move forward. Yeah, great.
Okay. Do we, guess the other kind of the issue, or what you kind of like section 2.24G, right now, the extent to which, that family members of commissioners receive, admission to the different park district facilities.
I thought the case background in Andrew's memo was helpful. I like the way it's defined in our bylaws to include spouse and dependent children living at home. I could imagine if it were to include adult siblings or other wide-ranging family members, that could get problematic. I don't know if that's part of the case in the issue that was at hand with Waukegan Park District, but I think the language that's here is clear to me. But I appreciate the background on the radar, and having this put on our radar.
I think in exceptions, we need to add information about the waiting list at Sailing Beach and also about the waiting list, or any waiting list that we have.
That's a good point.
To be more general, so that there's no skipping a line because you're a commissioner. I think that's practice already.
That's practice, yeah, we don't
But I
skip
just
lines.
want, because it mentions golf and tennis, for their, whatever the seasonal levels that you can buy into, we should mention that also.
Okay.
Or could we strike golf and tennis, and just say commissioners and family members have to comply with all rules and regulations, so it includes paddle, golf, tennis,
But
sailing.
it's about like the resident time lotteries that are involved with tennis and golf. So you can't have precedence in either of those lotteries, nor can you have precedence when you are waiting in line on a waiting list for any of the facilities that have limited number of slots available.
So I think
we're
specifically to
agreeing,
golf
actually.
and the tee time lottery, it's you need to buy the membership versus just play at no cost when you make a tee time. But to get a standing tee time, you have to have the same investment as a commissioner,
I see.
as a member of the public. That's the point.
As a
Not the
resident.
precedent of how you're handled within the
Okay,
the
so I
framework
read
of the
into it as
lottery.
precedent. Okay,
Right.
I apologize. But we're still talking about adding the waiting list issue,
Some
right?
language around the commissioners should not receive preference different
any,
than a regular citizen, with respect to wait lists and lotteries placements, or something that just generally says there's no favoritism and we follow the same process.
Yep.
And someone had asked me when this first came up, and I think I had maybe asked you, Andrew, are any of these benefits taxable? And if they are, what's the responsibility for reporting? Because,
I'll start with the caveat that I'm not a tax lawyer, and it's very, very technical, very, very quick. It is possible that some of these benefits could be deemed taxable. Most of the analysis involves, it's all fringe benefit analysis. A lot of it details, is it stuff that's available to the general public? Are you displacing other paying customers? And it gets much more complicated from there. But the short answer that I can give you standing right now is it depends, and it's possible.
all right, is that something that we should know, or is ignorance bliss?
No, I've done more detailed memos on it that I have back at my office that I can
Okay.
dig up and dust off and share, and that might answer some of your questions. And then if there's more specifics, we can get into it.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it certainly is something to be aware of. As long as what's in here and what's common practice in the Parks District world, as long as it's not abused, you're probably okay. But you could certainly have scenarios where it could be viewed. If you are abusing certain benefits or perks, it certainly could cross that line.
What's abusing? Abusing is a relative term, right?
Right.
Yeah,
The whole
so-
concept of the fringe benefit. It's all very fact specific, and it's all very relative.
So perhaps you could share those memos with
Yeah,
us, and we
yeah.
can decide whether we need to investigate. None of us want to run afoul of any rules. We just want to make sure that
Absolutely.
we're
I'll
following.
share what I have, and if
Okay.
it answers some questions, great. And if it triggers more questions, great. We can deal with those.
Someone had asked the question of me a while back, so I brought it up.
Yep.
Good enough.
Okay, you had flagged subsection H, to establish the operational philosophy of recreation programming for the Park District and set fees and charges to be approved at a regular board meeting. And your comment was, isn't this done at the staff level? And we have discussed previously about, to what extent the board should be involved in setting fees. I think that generally the feeling was that we should be hands-off, just sort of do a general, okay, we're going to raise fees 3%, but otherwise we're not getting into that because fees occasionally need to be adjusted quickly, and so we just generally stay away from that. So I don't know if it might be a good idea to take at least the reference to fees and charges to be taken out. And I'm not sure if anyone has any thoughts. Establish the operational philosophy of I would think that we are kind of at a more higher level to that than talk about the operational philosophy of recreation programming, that we tend to be a little bit more
Yeah, I guess I agree with you. I don't want to set the fee for the daily pool pass. The way that I read this, and Andrew perhaps weigh in, or even Steve, I assume we set those fees when we approve our budgets because the fees are in the budget. So that's how we go about doing it. We do it at a macro level. If the concern is that we're going to get down to the minutia, I share that concern with you. I'm just not sure how we address it.
Yeah, I can see, us, the board, discussing, the sort of the fees for resident versus non-resident, if it gets to a point that we're not comfortable with, with what that the two different fees are, that we might want to discuss that. So I see more of like the policy on it, but yes, I guess it doesn't, when it just says to set the fees and charges to be approved, I think that does, it's back to here, we have had board members who were interested in the minutia, and I don't think that is generally a good practice for board members to be involved in to micromanage.
But if we were to remove this, it could be argued then that during the budgeting process, we shouldn't be involved in how staff sets fees in our budget. So we can't approve then.
I
right?
do
it
like
could be
the
argued that-
philosophy word.
Yeah.
I think
So-
that's really important.
Yeah.
Say advise on fees and charges and be approved.
I think probably several of us have had the experience where someone approaches us and says, I can't believe this fee increased 20%. And it may have been a market adjustment that the staff felt was appropriate. And to me, that's something the staff needs to be able to decide. I like the sailing analogy that Andrew put in his memo. We want to get here, and then the board decides the destination, the staff figures out how to steer the ship.
So I like what you point out is operational philosophy. You know, that's the key phrase in this statement.
Agreed.
So,
But I have lived through some of, I think what Cecilia is referring to in terms of minutia of managing the fee debate. So I think we need to,
Yeah, and yes.
I think we need to ensure we have the spirit of operational philosophy without the minutia. So maybe it's at the annual budgeting meeting or.
Right, instead of, because again, the way that I read this is it's done at the budgeting meeting. So instead of stating at a regular board meeting at.
On an annual basis
Yeah,
or,
at-
at the annual.
Lindsay?
Can I ask, are we not complying or not following this? Or are we just talking about best practice?
Do you want to?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
I'm
so-
sure you understand what you're getting at.
I would say, are we doing anything contrary to this? So my approach is don't change it unless
Yeah.
it's problematic or broken or creating the wrong directive or causing problems, because there's a lot of unintended consequences that come from any changes,
There have
so.
been board members in the past who have gotten into the minutia
Okay.
of fees and such and more. And, I suppose in one sense, I'm not even sure if changing this would really, but at least, we gives someone, say, well, according to the operations manual, you shouldn't be doing that. It gives some sort of defense to staff members or, say, this, according to what you're supposed to be operating in, you're not supposed to be doing.
You could
what
keep
you're
someone in their lane if
doing.
necessary.
Yes. So,
So again, if we just change the language to be approved at the annual budget meeting, something to that effect. Again, Lindsay, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. It's come up a bunch of different times, but again, as I've always read this, it's that we're doing it in the context of the budgeting process, which I think will address Cecilia's concern. And again, to Cecilia's point, I think if somebody wants to ignore this, that person's going to ignore this anyway.
yeah, but it does, I guess it gives.
You could
Give
say,
some guidance.
approved, fees and charges to be approved during the regular budgeting process. Boom.
Yeah.
And can
I'm
I
good
just
with
ask,
that.
though, aren't they by saying it's at a regular board meeting, not a board meeting, meaning that could be your regular budget meeting? So there are arguably some parameters with that, but if you're saying that gives board members too much discretion to weigh in on fees at any point, should we address that in the bylaws, or should we be addressing that sort of as a board in our discussions and as we vote on items? I just think we need to be careful in how we're approaching these decisions, because I think in some part it has to be sort of as a board and as we take votes, and not necessarily try to fix things unless it's broken in the bylaws. But that's just my take.
No, I don't think I think everyone on this board would do not believe in micromanaging, but I guess I'm just back to like the experience not that long ago, and that there were some board members who were very into the micromanaging, and if by changing this can provide, and I think staff with some ammunition to say, hey, you aren't supposed to be doing that, that's why I kind of feel that it would be good to alter this somewhat. I mean, because I think we're not talking about taking this out, but we're just trying to clarify that the board is the policy aspects of the board. So we're approving more of a general, through the budgeting process, approving into the budgeting process, and we're not going to get involved with what the actual, fees are going to
And
be.
again, Lindsay, I'm sorry to interrupt. I've agreed with all of your comments thus far, but I think this is a relatively minor tweak. And again, it's how I've read this anyway. So I'd be comfortable, as the language that Patrick had suggested about through the budgeting process, and leave it at that, if people are okay with that.
Could I suggest maybe the same spirit, but maybe a softer change could be establish the philosophy and the programming for the practitioners and set fee and charge direct, or set fee direction to be approved, and then you could just leave at the regular board meeting, because say you change it, you don't call it a budget meeting, something, like, I like the flexibility. Maybe they decide there needs to be an increase mid-year because they went through something like another pandemic that caused another financial crisis and they needed to make a different adjustment. There could be any reason. So I like just keeping, because Lindsay's point about at a regular meeting, that could speak to an annual meeting. But if you just say set fee direction, I think that elevates it to the level that we're all trying to work towards.
I don't have any problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, great.
One other comment before we move on. We specifically call out the tax levy at the start of this section in terms of important things you need to do, and then we get into some of these other things. But the one thing we don't talk about, and we just touched on it a lot here, is the budget process and the adoption of the budget and appropriation ordinance. Those are two critical things that you guys do. So I think it would make sense maybe to create a
agree with
new
you.
subsection B that
Definitely.
specifically reference the budget and the budget and appropriation ordinance.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Very good.
And actually, that gives up, I had a question mark, and for subsection C, enact periodic adjustments in the operational policies of said revenue facilities. I kind of wasn't sure what that maybe I'm just not seeing that, but I wasn't sure exactly
That's a
what
great
that
point.
referred
Do we really
to.
need that?
What
That's a
it
great
referred
point.
to.
I don't see any reason why we need it.
Does anyone see where we do that, or what we do that, or?
So,
You could add something like if necessary or as necessary.
Sure.
enact periodic, I mean, doesn't that mean as necessary, enact periodic
yeah.
adjustments?
I think reading it as it is, I might read that to say it's required to happen quarterly or something along those lines.
Well, I mean, but what is?
And I
but
don't know
what's
why
the
we're,
upper-
I don't know why we're calling out revenue facilities as opposed to
Yeah.
programming and whatnot. I'd be more comfortable taking it out unless somebody gives me a compelling reason why it's in there.
Sort of feel the same way about B. I mean, decide upon the use of funds generated by revenue-producing facilities after operational and maintenance cost. I mean, that's part of your budget process, right?
Right, and going back to
So
the language that you're
Why are we-
suggesting for
why
the
are we
budget
carving
process,
out? Yeah.
I
I think
think
you could
that's,
probably dump B and C as unnecessary.
and really
Cover-
substitute what you were suggesting for the budget process. So it's not really dumping them, it's better
Right,
refining.
we're
it.
making it-
Expanding, yeah. I think
expanding
that's a
it.
great way to look at it.
Okay.
Everybody comfortable?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Great.
So we're dumping B and C.
And putting in some language about the budgeting and
Yeah. So
appropriations
we're
process.
We're
So we're sort of
folding them
broadening
into
it.
the budgeting,
Yeah.
the budgeting process. So not,
So I'm going to ask a question that kind of came up this past summer, right? Adjustments were made to schedules. And there was pushback from some people in the community. It was expressed, and during the meeting, we asked, well, why can't we, expand hours or whatever? And there wasn't a movement. Is that something now we can't do?
I don't believe so.
I mean, isn't that setting policy in a sense, with the operational hours?
Because
I mean,
it's getting into operations, but it's, we're in the community as well, and, how come we can't go to the pool at this time anymore? How come, why did this change coming out? Why couldn't we go back to what we had? And yet there wasn't an adjustment and so some people were frustrated by that. I know we didn't get as many emails as Keep Gilson Green, but there was some feeling in the community that, service wasn't what we had.
Well, but those were issues that were brought up by people in the community, and the staff, as part of staff, tries to address those, and it, I don't know if it really rises to a board issue. It's something that would be addressed by staff, and was addressed by staff. So
But I think Commissioner Duffy's question is the question I was having during this discussion, was if with this change and deletion of the language,
Yeah.
does it take away
Any of our,
the board's ability to give direction that says we want to go back to a prior schedule because of the feedback we've received to date? Like the flexibility,
Right.
have we taken away the flexibility? And that's,
Yeah.
I guess,
guess I
really a
would-
question that I don't have the answer to.
And I
was
guess I
thinking the
would
same
point
thing.
to where in the document does it prevent? So unless it prohibits, I don't think. So I'm not sure where it's an issue from my
My
perspective.
reaction would be, this document is delegating certain powers to the executive director to act on behalf of the board. And that's a good idea because Steve individually and with the input of staff can react much quickly to changing circumstances. That's a good thing. However, like with any delegation of power, if you are upset with how it's being utilized, the board can certainly step in and say, okay, Steve, we understand that you and staff thought it was a great idea to cut back on pool hours. However, as a board, we disagree with you and we're going to overrule you in this case. So I think you could absolutely step back in and correct them. And
even with
looking-
this language removed.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think also a lot of that goes to your relationship with your executive director, which is, the last 18 months have been sort of unprecedented. But I think for any big decision, if Steve is going to make a major departure from protocol, my guess is he would probably consult with the board before doing it.
Although we should be approaching this document as a long-term document and not something that fits our current situation. So
I
we
totally
should-
agree. I was
I
just
agree.
thinking that
We should
because
be
we
thinking
have a
about-
tenured executive director and a board that has trust, I feel
Yeah,
like
let's
we
pretend-
might be applying our current situation to the
Yeah,
the
so we
tone.
should approach this as if, unfortunately, Steve can go be president and we have to hire someone else and they're terrible. So how are we protected as a board in that situation and how is their balance?
So what, Andrew answered that, I think, by saying, well, even by striking that, we can still exercise these
Well, that's-
directives because it's policy.
And I guess that's where that, empowered to make decisions for the district, I mean, that's where kind of that comes in.
Yeah,
So-
and ideally, let's put it this way, all well-run districts should aspire to have the confidence in whoever they've selected as their executive director to run the day-to-day operations with board oversight. And if that's not getting done, then the board needs to step in and figure out why, and if they can fix that person, great, and if they can't, then they need to find somebody else. But what we want to try to avoid, and I understand what you're saying from a long-term document, but for the Park District to operate efficiently, the board figures out the policy, it goes to the executive director, and then the executive director and his staff figure out how to implement that district-wide, and then you judge him or her on their success in doing so. But you have to get it to them because if you stay in the nitty-gritty details, it's going to be a mess.
True, and I will absolutely defer, and if you confirm that you're not taking any authority away from the board
No.
and that it would still be, I am comfortable with just one more piece, like, we are talking about best practices and the way it should work, but we need to continue to think about when problems arise. But with that confirmation, I would be comfortable.
And again, back to this, obviously, after the changes come through, we're going to review them again, and we can look at that through that lens and revisit if we need to. But Lindsay, I agree with everything you're saying.
Bringing that up.
All right.
Okay. Section 2.25. How do I have it underlined?
You're not recommending any changes, Andrew?
Though I underlined something that said, when I underlined policy setting in, and then I noted conflict with 2.24.
Probably D. Must be exercised within the policies that have been agreed upon by the board. The board should recognize that countless situations will arise which are not explicitly covered, which therefore require an administrative decision. Do you know where you think there's a
Yeah, I don't know why it
inconsistency?
was.
That looks okay to me.
Oh, maybe it was the maybe it was the empowered to make decisions. I think that's where I saw it, said there was potentially the conflict, because here we're saying that we're setting, policy setting, and that one line said can make decision, power to make the decisions. So that was, yes, so I think that's what I was looking at.
Gotcha.
As being the potential conflict. Okay. Okay, so then we have.
2.26, no changes?
Yeah, I think 2.6, I mean, I don't know, I guess no changes, it's, keep it as a possibility, although has anyone ever been bonded? Are you aware of, Steve? No?
Yeah.
No.
But I guess we need to keep that as an option. Okay, so 2.27, with the minutes, official minutes, and I guess my only question I thought, well, you have a suggestion to add a, as required by state
State statutes, that makes sense.
I guess my other question is, says the official minute book shall be open for public inspection by interested individuals. Do we mention that minutes, should we mention that minutes shall be published online? I mean, because that's what we do on a regular basis now. Do we?
Yeah, I feel like some of this is dated language,
Yeah,
minute book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Where is the minute book, Steve?
Where's the minute book?
yeah.
I would like to inspect
I-
it.
Yes.
You can, they're all in my office, going all the way back to 1908.
Oh,
Oh,
amazing.
Yeah.
What a waste
I've
of
got some
paper.
light reading ahead of me. This is very exciting.
There should all be
and
scanned.
that's-
have been hijacked.
I mean, in today's, I should say, even though in sense it's, if we add something saying and shall be posted, the website is kind of, yes, limiting us.
But it's in the interest of
it's-
transparency.
But that's.
So I would
and that's
support that
today's world.
as
I
well.
mean, we're not going to not put them up on websites, so I kind of feel like that we should include.
I guess the question, so there's a variety of sort of modern updates due to amendments in the Open Meetings Act, posting on the website, the approval. So I guess the question is, how far do you want to go, or do you want to just simply stay and they'll be otherwise available in compliance with the Open Meetings Act, or do you want to specifically say on the website? I guess the question is, how far do you want to go with what you put in here from the statutes?
I prefer open language because we're especially coming into a day and age just where social media even, I mean, things
Yeah,
are being
I
posted
mean, what if we
there.
made it by RSS feed
Right.
someday, and that's the norm?
Yeah.
I don't
So,
know.
I
In a
think
manner
I agree with
available
her.
to the public, easily
Yeah,
accessible to the
yeah.
public.
Okay.
Great.
But I guess we should say, and minutes shall be made available as provided by the Open Meetings Act. So just kind of standardize the way it is.
Again, that's fine with me. Going back to Andrew's comment, I mean, we're required to abide by the Open Meetings Act in lots of different ways in lots of different places. Do we want to call it out in one specific section? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I assume making the minutes available in an official minute book is probably statutory as well, so
Sure.
I think
I don't
it's
have a strong
fine,
feeling.
Fine if we just throw in a little more
Yeah.
reference and any other, that make any other way as provided for by the Open Meetings Act.
Can we all agree that we're going to kill 2.28
Yes,
for Andrew's recommendation?
yes.
We should state his recommendation for the record.
Sure.
Okay,
Andrew?
I have kind of a question, because that's kind of like how do residents get an issue up before us if they don't, this provides a way, I don't know, do we have any other, I know generally we are definitely open to residents, but, this, and yes, this could be kind of, could backfire, but how do residents get issues up before the board to be considered and this is at least one way to do that?
Yeah, I guess I interpreted the petition as any other, the way that reads to me, we treat it like we would community correspondence. If we were to receive a petition, it would be, and there's a little extra language, like we would notify the submitter that it's been received and will be, included on the agenda on X date. But I didn't read this as it's setting direction on our agenda.
So I
Actually,
think that.
that's how it does.
Yeah, I think the first sentence
That's the
talks
problem.
about petitions being directed to the board, the Park District will be brought to the attention
Shall
of the board.
be.
That's fine.
Not
Bringing it to
maybe,
the-
shall be. Yeah.
What I have,
Okay.
what I strongly recommend striking is the second
Got it.
portion of 228, which says, basically, the petition gets placed on the agenda at a special meeting, and it is required to be discussed by the board. I think that's, again, this is just my opinion, you guys are free to do what you want. members of the public are free to send you emails, they're free to call you, they're free to come to meetings and speak during public comment. I think providing a mechanism to allow people to force items onto the agenda, regardless of what the board thinks, whether they're appropriate or not, and then forcing them to be discussed is a bad way to practice as a board. But that's my opinion.
No, I guess in a some, well, this board has been amenable to, like, Mallinckrodt, when people, residents wanted Mallinckrodt, but what if the board wasn't? And what if the board is not being receptive to what's, what the residents are seeking? I mean, and what if the board keeps, potentially ignoring it? What if it's,
I guess my response without, it's a representative democracy. If they're not satisfied with what they're getting from their commissioners, then they need to elect new commissioners or they need to run themselves. But I think you open the door to a very high level of abuse where people can hijack your meetings and force issues on you that you've already decided. You could come up with a million reasons how this could go terribly wrong, right? But it could be something as simple as a capital project that you guys have discussed as a board and decided that no longer warrants attention, or you were forced to choose between A, B, and C, and you went with option C, and people wanted option A, and they keep bringing it back and bringing it back and bringing it back, and it's on your agenda. You guys were elected to make decisions. That includes involving the public, getting their input, but at some point, you guys were all elected by the residents to get up here and make those decisions, and that's what you're supposed to do. I think you're subverting the process if you allow an unelected member of the public to set the agenda of the park board. And to me, that's what this provision does. But again, I have a strong opinion on this. I think as a lawyer, when this goes bad, this would be an ugly one to deal with. So I think that's why I have a strong opinion. But again, this is your board, and if you guys want to provide that mechanism, that's certainly up to you guys to decide.
I'm going to pass. I think it was answered.
I think there's a process for people to get things on the agenda. Look at Frisbee golf, right?
yeah, but that took a long time to get on
Well,
the
it only took a
agenda,
long
very
time
long
until I told him how to do it. He didn't he kept presenting his plan and people just said, okay, that's public comment. What he needed to do was talk to one of the board members, the committee members of the proper committee and ask them to get it on the agenda. And when he did that, I said, okay, I need A, B, and C from you so that we can get it on the agenda and talk about it. And he's like, all right, here is everything. And then it became on the agenda. Then we asked staff to take a look at it. So the problem was he never asked a board member to get it on any agenda, and the board never put it on an agenda for him. So there is a process. It was just never explained to him. And the board decided never to take action on it until it got put on an agenda.
Well, except I kind of disagree because I felt like he was talking to board members all the time. Maybe it was just planned, and no one ever. So any one board member never stepped up and said, "Let's put this on the agenda." They just kind of kept.
So where are other folks on this? I mean, I know I spoke up early, I think.
Yeah, I'm fine. I defer to Andrew's direction.
I
was as well, right.
I will as well.
Yep. Okay, great.
But we're not going to strike the section. We leave it there
Right.
such that it says it will be brought to the attention of the board at the earliest opportunity.
No, yeah, I think the first sentence is appropriate.
Because I
It's
don't
the
want the
second.
public to feel like we are taking away their right to petition us in any way.
Absolutely.
And I want to make it clear that we will, like any community correspondence, we would review it and acknowledge it.
No, I
So as long
100%
as
agree
that
with
is still clear. I guess back to my comment initially, when I interpreted placed on the agenda, in my mind, that could mean it goes into the public comment recognition. I didn't read it as it must be an agenda new item topic. So that's why I was comfortable with that. But based on what you're saying, I'm good with that. But if you wanted to include something like it will be specifically acknowledged as part of community correspondence, you could broaden it if necessary. But if you think that the first part covers the spirit of making sure that they're heard and acknowledged, then I'm good with that.
section 2.29, park board committees. Okay, I think there's a lot there. There's a lot there. All right, so the committees are set at the annual meeting, or at the meeting which the president of the board selected. Since their board is president of the board selected yearly, it would be at the annual meeting. President of the board shall establish standing committees and charge them with their assignments.
I'm sorry, but you just said that the president's elected annually?
Yes,
Oh, I thought it was a 2-year term.
No, the president's elected at the annual meeting. Our past practice had been, until recently, that presidents served 2 consecutive terms,
I
but then
see.
Amy served a 3rd year,
All right,
which
I
meant
misunderstood
Gordon
the
just.
semantics of that.
Yeah.
All right.
yeah, no, so,
It's an annual decision. It's part of our annual meeting.
Yep.
the standing committees will sit for 1 year or until the next selection of the board president. Well, I guess I feel like since, I'm wondering that at least that last phrase, the next selection of the board president, whether it's superfluous and whether it's needed, because the board, the president is selected every year and he sets the committee, and so every year it would be reselected, so.
Well, I think the notion is, and again, I don't think it doesn't happen often, but if the president were to leave mid-year, does that give the new leadership an opportunity to restructure? I think that's the question. That's how I read it. So I don't see any problem with it.
I do like the notion that the committees are only for 1 year and you rotate, because I know I've enjoyed moving from golf to finance to lakefront and having broad exposure to each of these. I think that's important for us, even while we might all have our favorite committees. I like the idea of moving every year as a committee member,
I mean, it may make.
or the option to stay, but at minimum, we mix up the committees every year.
And I guess, would it be a bad thing if the president were to leave mid-year and we get a new president? Do we really want to switch all the committees after 6 months? I mean,
No, I don't think we necessarily do. It's whether you have the flexibility. And we as a group did discuss whether with a new commissioner coming in, whether we wanted to review that, and we collectively decided that did make sense, and so we plugged Lindsay into the existing committees. I thought that process worked fine.
But I could acknowledge that there could be a scenario where it might not be helpful, like, it doesn't feel applicable to us now, but to leave the flexibility that should there be, maybe the committees that that president was, no, they're not on committees anyway, I guess. I don't know. I suppose there could be a scenario, but just to Andrew's point about maintaining flexibility, I don't have a problem with the way it is, knowing that, we elect the president makes, the board still has input into these decisions and would, at any time, the conversation could surface if they were in that position of needing to replace a president midterm.
To provide some context, I didn't write this, so I'm guessing a little bit, but I think the attempt here by referencing or until the next selection of the board president, I think they're borrowing from the concept that commissioners serve until their successors are elected and qualified, or that the officers serve until their successors are appointed, meaning if there's a delay in the process, you don't have some weird question of a vacancy. It's just you're in your office for a year or until we get around to filling your spot. And
That
if it
makes
drags
sense.
out, so I think that's my guess is that's the concept, is that you sit for a year. The idea is at the next annual meeting, the new president's going to start the process, the board's going to approve it, but if there's some delay for whatever reason, those committees stay constituted until it gets sorted out.
That makes sense.
And we can certainly clean that up.
My one question is in the first sentence about the timing of it. And I know that your comments are about, streamlining, making the decision as quick as possible. But, to say that, or the first regular meeting thereafter, I know that there was a question with the last election about getting all the meetings out or the committees out and trying to get meetings scheduled on time. And we kind of I felt like we ran up against that first meeting wall kind of quickly. So I thought maybe some language in there about, or as fast as possible, because there was a resident who was kind of being a Hawkeye and, started saying that nothing's been announced and it's 30 days or however you're phrasing it, or they were phrasing it. So I just, I don't want to be called out for something that, sometimes you can't make happen in that first 30 days. Or are we just looking at this as guidelines and not actual rules that you get punished for?
Well, I don't
Turn
know, I
off the
mean,
microphone. There is a problem, I mean, there is an inherent delay built into how this is structured and the way the annual meeting works, in that the election happens in April, you have to wait for the 21 days for the election results to be certified, then you
Yep.
have to have your annual meeting
Yep.
to figure out, number one, who are your commissioners for the upcoming term, and then also who are your officers going to be. And sometimes you know, and it's predetermined, and other times you don't know. So it's difficult then if you're going to task the president with board approval. If someone doesn't know who the president's going to be at that first annual meeting, how can you come with your list of stuff, which means you have to wait until the next meeting, which means.
You have
when
to get it done at that meeting then.
Right.
Which is what we came up
Right,
against.
but it
Right.
builds in an almost 2 months delay between the election and then
Right.
the actual establishment of committees. And there's a lot of stuff that probably could and should happen during that window, and what do you do with it? And that's what we kind of slogged through this year. And so I guess to answer your question, sometimes you just have to do the best you can.
Right. So do we need language to say that, or are we just going to leave it, or is your advice to just leave it like this because we'll just do the best that we can? Again, guideline or rule.
I mean, and instead of the first regular, I mean, you could make small tweaks like, or as soon thereafter as possible or something like that, so we don't have.
I would love to see some
Yeah.
flexibility in the language,
Okay.
that's all. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to make a
And we
huge case
can't,
out
I
of
mean,
it.
we can't do too much to it. I mean, because
Right.
you could just say, I mean, right now it's the president with board approval, so basically the entire board has to agree. But you can't do much with that because someone's got to take the reins and make the decision.
Yeah,
And
well, I'm not
so-
trying to, I just want, I felt that there was undue pressure or criticism by somebody from the public who was, trying to make a case out of us not having the committees ready by that first meeting. And because they were reading this as law, that you had to do this. This is the rule. This is the law. And it's like, well, we just figured out who the president was. Give us time to get everything together. And
I
so-
think most of your concerns in terms of adding the flexibility and avoiding someone kind of dangling this arbitrary deadline over your head
Yeah.
would be to just work on the language or the first regular meeting thereafter and just change it to or as soon thereafter as possible.
Yeah, something like
And
that.
I think
perfect.
that gives you the
Yeah.
ability
That's all,
to.
that's
That's
all I'm
easy.
looking for, yeah.
Yeah, that's easy. Yeah.
Right. Do we want to list standing committees? Especially since the standing committees that are there, say Centennial Operations Committee, which apparently doesn't really, now is the
And there's no
Facilities
lakefront committee.
There's
Andrew and
no
I
real
talked
estate
about this
committee.
fairly extensively, and at the time, there was some talk about maybe just stating the standing committees of the park board as of a specific date are. Because in the next paragraph, it says at the meeting at which the standing committees are established. So there's an inconsistency. So I think it makes sense to define what they are as of a date, but then clearly in section B, the board has the flexibility to change those.
If I read this without section A at all, it seems to get the job done, because it says in
Yeah.
the first paragraph of
At the
229, the president shall establish the standing committees and charge them with their assignments, et cetera. They sit, and then at the meeting in which they're established, they shall appoint. So I agree with Andrew's counsel in the memo that specifying them is, if you wanted to add some language around consistent with past practice or to be reviewed with the director as necessary, you could always add a little extra, but I don't feel it's necessary.
I'm comfortable with eliminating them. I mean, it clearly, in section B says how you do it on an annual basis. It seemed like there was an inconsistency here before.
Maybe you would want to put something like there should be a parameters for how many committees there would be, or should say at no less than X number of committees, just to, I don't know, I'm thinking ahead to Lindsay's point about always thinking of a scenario where the board was super lazy and didn't want to do much work and said, we're just going to have one committee. And I suppose, we wouldn't want to, that would be a terrible situation for the public in general had we elected that type of a board. But, maybe you want a minimum number of committees.
On the flip side, though, it is,
Yeah, there's
some districts just do, they don't have the individual committees, and they
Yeah.
just have a committee of the whole
Yeah.
regular board meeting structure. So,
This-
again, to lock yourself into a certain number, these things are killing me. You might decide that,
That's a good point.
again, so,
Okay.
and I think my overall comment for this, I think it would certainly simplify it to do away with calling it out specifically, because it gives you then the flexibility, and if for some reason there isn't a need for one in a given year, you don't have to have it. But the way this is set up is confusing and inconsistent, and we've got the four that are
Absolutely.
called out in A, and then in C, D, and E, we have other committees, so they're not specifically called standing committees, but they're included as committees, so what are they? I think they should all
And
be.
some specify the number of members and some
Right.
don't. It's
So,
confusing.
To
Absolutely.
me, I think if we get rid of A and calling it out, and we get rid of some of these other things, and we just allow the board the flexibility to come up with it, the
Create
president
standing
suggests, the board approves, and then just create a consistent, here's how it's going to be staffed, that gets us a long way to a workable process.
And then,
Just confirm that we're not taking away the board's authority to establish committees, and we'll still describe both the process for standing and special committees. So
Absolutely.
we're not taking any of that away. I just
No.
want to confirm. Okay.
Nope.
there is a point here, we should have a substantive conversation about whether the president is an ex officio member of all
Yeah, I was
committees,
gonna
or
say-
if the president is a member of committees like other commissioners.
Yeah, and I think that is, yes. that
We
is
should pick a
def-
lane.
Yes, that's.
Let's pick a
yes,
lane.
Definitely have, and first of all, I will just stay out here. I do not think the president should be an ex officio member of any committee.
I agree.
Yeah.
And the idea to have the president as ex officio member, what's the benefit of that?
I don't know.
My concept is it's, in my opinion, it's sort of an archaic concept in the sense that it's a part of Robert's rules. I think it has its place in a large organization with hundreds of people and tons of committees, and that it might make sense to have a single person who can bounce around and stay connected. But for a smaller group like this, where you guys kind of all are involved in everything and it's going up, just to me, it overcomplicates things. I also think it's at odds with the concept that the president
Comes from the group, right.
Yeah, you're a
Right.
part of the group. You don't really have any special powers as president, other than running the meeting. So treating the president sort of as a special figurehead, I also think is inconsistent with how our code is set up. And then when you really get into the technicalities of the Roberts rules, and you can show up, but you don't count towards the quorum, but you can talk and you can vote.
It's
but you don't
just
have to go to
odd.
meetings.
I
It
know.
just creates kind of this.
And to be honest with you, this
situation.
confusion just came up with the Lakefront Committee this last week. I think it's confusing to a lot of people. I mean, the park board president is selected from the group, doesn't really have special powers other than what's called out here. I think it makes sense that the president is a committee member like everybody else without being on every committee and able to vote on every committee. I don't think it makes any sense for the president to be an ex officio member.
Cool. I'm all for taking the president's cape away.
Absolutely. Me too. Anybody else?
When I was like, and I guess I'm just kind of raising this point, when I was considering running for the board and speaking with board members, forget now, John Vaney, and he's like, he was president, and he said, I do not sit on any committee because I do not want to run the risk of an Open Meetings Act violation. So he just was not on any committee, he was just the president, because then he can talk with anyone on any committee. Is that, so I guess I'm thinking, is that a practice that should be, do we, right now we have Mike the president on a couple of committees, and he's the chair of a committee. So is it good practices, is it a better practice for him not to be on any committee, or should can he still be the chair, or is it okay for him to be on committees? And I think that's one of the reasons, I also didn't want be ex officio, because then he's generally, when he's talking to anyone on any committee, there's an Open Meetings Act violation.
Actually, that's not correct.
Yeah, I was going to say,
That's not correct.
in concept, I think that makes sense, but based on how Robert's Rules interprets the powers of an ex officio member, they don't have to, but they can attend, they can speak, they're not counted towards a quorum, but they can vote. I think you're a member of that group for Open Meetings Act purposes. So I don't think you can wear the ex officio hat and escape the definition of a
No,
meeting under the Open Meetings
yes,
Act in terms of discussing it. I would caution
I would
against
agree,
that.
which would be, I feel would be another reason to remove ex
Yeah,
officio
and
member.
we're just
But
clarifying it.
But now I guess I'm saying, having the president be part of a committee. On the one hand, if the president is a board member, yes, that would be good, good to have, but does it also sort of impact on the ability of a president to talk with other board members, and potentially another board member that's on the same committee that the president is on? And is that is that hindering the president, or hindering it in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer is yes. You do have to be concerned about Open Meetings Act violations, but I think that's true
Of all commissioners.
regardless of all commissioners. And I think, that's one of the quirks with how the Open Meetings Act defines the definition of a meeting for Open Meetings Act purposes, which is it's a majority of a quorum. They made a carve out. So the majority of a quorum for a 5-person board would be 2 people, right? But they recognize it's crazy to tell 2 people that they can't talk to each other, because how do you communicate? So that works for the 5-person board. Not the same issue with a 7-person board, but what the Open Meetings Act has never addressed, and I don't know why, if you have a 3-person committee, you're back to the same thing of 2 people, but there's no carve out. So technically, 2 committee members, a 3-person committee speaking to each other is a technical violation of the Open
Yes.
Meetings Act. But again, practically speaking, how the heck do you ever set anything up if you can't discuss committee business with another committee member without violating the act? So I guess the idea is you try to minimize it as much as possible, but that is a real concern.
And
You
to
just talk
clarify,
procedure, and you're not talking, the only time you're talking substance is when you're actually in the committee
Right,
meeting.
and I guess the point that I'm trying to make is they recognize somewhere along the way that allowing 2 people to speak to each other makes some level of sense. But why they didn't fix that at the committee level, especially with smaller numbers, I've never understood that, but it's just a quirk of the law.
Well, but I guess, again, and that raises the question, but if the president, he could, as president, if he wasn't on a committee, he could talk to anyone in any committee and ask how the
That's
committee's
true.
going. But when he's a member of 2 or 3 committees, he can't speak to the other participants and not the other committee members.
but again, the president's just a peer. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah,
the president runs the board meeting.
Right, and then it gets complicated because which hat are you wearing at the time you're having the conversation, right? Because let's just say that you and Mike are both on the same committee. Technically, in your role as committee members, you can't talk to each other without violating the act. But if you're wearing your commissioner hat, not your committee member hat.
Then you're fine.
You're fine because
Right.
you're on a 7-member board. So, it's just one of those things that you got to do the best you can with. And but you're right, having him on the committees does create, for the committees he on, it makes it, you have to be careful for Open Meetings Act stuff.
Which again is the same issue that we have for any 2 members on a committee. It's
Right.
not unique
Correct.
to the president.
Correct.
Okay, so we are all in agreement, though, that the president should be removed as an ex officio member. Right.
Well, I guess my comment would be, I think we pick a lane. Either the president is an ex officio member of all the committees, or the president is on certain committees. I think it's one or the other. I don't think it's both or neither. It's one or the other, in my mind.
That's what I thought. I assumed that by removing them as ex officio, then we are in agreement that the president is then on committees.
Correct.
Yeah, that's kind of what I assume you were implying, Cecilia.
Yeah,
Am I
I
wrong?
mean, that's kind of, yeah, that is kind of, that the president can be on a committee, although I think we should have the opportunity that the president feels that it would not be wise to be on the committee, that president is not on a committee, can choose not to be on a committee.
Well, right, the president sets the committee members, so a president could choose not to. That wouldn't prohibit. That's the president's prerogative.
Can I
Yes.
confirm, under the current bylaws, with the ex officio designation, our president can either choose to serve as an ex officio member or assign himself to be a
Well,
member
he's
of
done
the
both.
committee?
Well, and actually,
He's
just to
done both.
clarify that, because I think this is important, I I was in favor of having the president serve on a committee and for this group then to remove the president as an ex officio member. We've been slow getting to this meeting, so we haven't done that yet, but it's always been my recommendation that we should remove the president as an ex officio member and have the president be a member of committees just like all the other commissioners. We've been in this weird limbo period because we've been in the process of reviewing this document for months now. But hopefully we can get through this today and then it's done.
Okay, one other question, Andrew. What practices have you seen on other boards who do utilize committees as we do? How does the president typically participate?
That's to my recollection, thinking of clients, I think they just sit on, I mean, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they sit on committees like other boards.
So if I can just point out that while we were in this limbo, the ex officio status only came into play one time, and that was at this last Lakefront Committee meeting, where I thought it was advantageous to have a third member up there, since it was only a two-person board. I thought it helped establish some, I don't want to call it control, but authority during that meeting, that there were three board members. I thought it was advantageous that, and that was the only time that it ever came into play, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would prefer that there was not the ex officio, that we just ran with it as we've been playing along, that the president can be on committees or choose not to, because it's not defined that they have to be on if we remove the ex officio statement.
I guess I think we are all in agreement that the president should not be an ex officio member, and you've been good, but I just generally, there are just too many issues that can arise with that, so that we do that. As far as I suppose if we are taking the view, or that's expressed in the manual, that the president is just a board member, then he should be on a committee,
That's how I look at it.
Yeah, or I like the idea that this person shared with you. I am not on a committee so that I could talk with people,
Well,
but,
yeah, I guess
I also kind of like Andrew's statement, well, which hat are you wearing,
Yeah, that's
right? So I think it's advantageous to the rest of us if the president can be on committees, because it lightens the load on your schedule. I mean, I'm, like I said, I'm on 4 committees, and it's because we've added some committees, and I'm not having a problem with it. It'd be easier for everybody if the president was taking up some of that time, because otherwise everybody would be on 4 or 5 committees.
okay. I guess
So we're striking the sentence.
Yes.
We're removing the president as an ex officio member, and we're leaving the other point silent.
And we're
I'll
getting rid of
just
the
say,
state.
sorry, I would typically oppose sort of taking away an option, but it sounds like there are compelling reasons, and
Yes.
it would allow for, open conversations and consistency across practice, so I would support it.
All right, so we are striking that.
You're supporting striking ex officio.
Sorry, yes, sorry, I was agreeing, sorry.
Okay. Now, the manual, in addition to the standing committees, also identify intergovernmental committee, cooperation committee, administration committee, a real estate committee. Do we really need those? Or
So
do we just have
I think we're eliminating all discussion about
Okay.
specific committees, and it's
Okay.
established on an annual
Okay.
basis.
Okay, so
Right.
that's what we're doing.
So,
Okay.
absolutely. And it was a weird drafting technique that you had these,
Should
so,
we-
just,
Yeah, this piece together.
right, it didn't make any sense.
Should we, though, at least have some, that how many commissioners should be on a committee? Should we add language to that, to?
Well, again, if we go to a committee of the whole structure, then all commissioners are on. So I think it probably, again, makes
But I
more
think-
sense to be silent and have flexibility.
So we could have committees with 4 people on it or 5 people on it? I mean,
Again, I think that going back to Patrick's comment, I would hope not, because there's a workload issue unless we kind of go to a committee of the whole structure. But I think that we should, again, I don't know what we're going to do next year.
I mean, I guess so I think that's.
If I could just, so right now and again, we can change it, but right now the manual, at least with respect to the standing committees, talks about 3 commissioners. I think one of the reasons for keeping it at 3 is that it's less than a majority of the board. So one thing you could,
right.
one
Thank
thing you
you.
could run into at a committee structure where you have 4 or
Right.
5 people is
Thank
you
you.
have a committee subset of the board that represents the majority of the board, ostensibly making, even though they're not, they can make final decisions at the committee meeting because they've got a majority, and then they can wipe out the other board members.
Yes.
So
Right.
those 3 who aren't on the committee will not be involved in the process, arguably. So the potential for abuse is there. So I think that's why the magic number is 3. But
So
again,
just some language to the effect that any committee that does not include all board members must have 3 members?
yeah, I mean, we just say with the exception of the committee of the whole, which
Yeah.
will be comprised of the full board. Standing committees will have
3 members.
3 members.
I'm good with that.
Or-
Oh,
or
Lindsay.
less.
Can I just, sorry, I have so many questions as the new person. Can I just ask a process question? So let's just say we wanted to create a new committee, or there was a new area of work that came up, for example, strategic planning. Instead of maybe creating a committee, could that work be done in the committee of the whole? Is that work that can be done on the board? It doesn't have to, what goes through committees, what doesn't? Can I ask that as a process question?
That's a good
Absolutely.
question.
Yeah.
Actually
Yeah, I'd
came
love
up
to leave the board
why
to
we
answer.
created,
Yeah.
we asked for each committee to outline what their
Their
area
goals are.
of
Right.
practice was going to be. So, I don't know what to say. So I think, I think what we have done, at least in practice, is that whenever there is an issue that we feel is big enough that we want the entire board to be involved in, we have called a committee of the whole. So even Lakefront Committee has met as a committee of the whole
Right.
to discuss Gilson. We are meeting today, which would be financial planning and policy as a committee of the whole. So I think in the sense that each of the standing committees, when they feel that they are dealing with an issue that does require the entire board to be involved in, because we don't vote on a committee of a whole. All we do is so we can get consensus or what we can discuss. So when there's some topic of issues that we feel is large enough that instead of there being a bifurcated where a smaller group then has to report to the large group, where it's better to have the larger group listen to, we can always call a committee of the whole for that group. And so any group any committee could meet as a committee of the whole. So,
And I believe, Andrew, would we keep provision F where special committees may be established at any time
Yes.
and they would?
Although
meet
I,
until the
to
business-
make things consistent, I would at least throw this out for you guys to discuss. For the standing committees or the other committees, it's selected by the president with board approval, and then for some reason, the special committees are only the president. I might suggest to make it even that it's selected by the president with board approval,
yeah.
just because that seems to make sense. But yes, no, we will keep sort of the ability to create these standing committees, and then we'll reserve the right to create special or ad hoc committees as well, with the same uniform sort of process for filling it and approving it. I think makes sense.
Answer your question.
Great. Anything else on committees?
And then one other comment, I think in F, we might want to, again, switch the set number of days to just as soon as possible. So again, we don't have an artificial deadline
That
because
makes sense.
coming up with those might take a little bit of time.
Okay.
okay. All right, we're leaving committees. 2.30.
Yeah, looks like discussed and consensus was reached
Yeah,
on 2
yeah,
point.
so 2.30, I think
30.
we've covered. 2.31, we've discussed, and then we're up to 2.32, which was deferred, and that was, oh, yes. Yes, whether any proposed amendment or modification to the organization and operation guidelines must be referred to a financial planning and policy committee for review. Well, then I would say just a meeting of the whole should be considered a meeting of the whole.
But if we're talking about, this kind of goes to the other point that we're looking at as soon as you give us we're going to review these every 3 or 5 years, right? So, I mean, I would be fine with I think it would be fine with the Financial and Planning Policy Committee just to review every 3 to 5 years, because there won't be significant changes. And then they make the recommendation to the board to, because, it's taking more time now, and we're doing this committee of the whole because it's been 10 or 12 years. Whereas if we're reviewing every 3 to 5, it's more about just keeping up with the rules, the law. And it should be an easier process.
Although aren't we deleting all specific reference to committees?
Correct.
So we just have to adjust that.
Yeah,
That's correct. We don't have this committee necessarily, so referring to a committee that may or may
Right.
not exist is problematic. That's a great point, Lindsay.
And I do feel like it should be a committee of the whole meeting to review it, because if a
an
subset
administration
makes
matter.
Yeah.
makes some decisions that the rest of the committee doesn't agree with, it's going to create a loop that's going to be more time consuming than just nipping it in the bud. And
That's right.
And Patrick, I would agree with that as well. I think that for these things, I think it makes sense for the whole group to discuss. And from a practical standpoint, we don't necessarily have that committee, so how can we refer to it? So we've got that double whammy, if you will. I think that's the legal term, isn't it? Double whammy.
Double whammy, yes,
Yeah,
that's a
great.
term of art.
Absolutely.
And I might suggest, as we did in the section with the residency of the director, I might suggest building in some language that will allow the board to vote to forego the committee of the whole if they deem it appropriate, because as we saw here, there could be a change in the law, there could be something that necessitates prompt action by the board, and sometimes having to go through the committee structure will slow it down. And again, that just gives people the ability to hang something over your head that you're not complying with your own policy, so throw that out there for consideration.
Yeah. If you advise.
Okay.
So at this point, you will take these changes, put another draft together for us to review, and then we can see if it merits additional discussion, or we can approve it at either this upcoming board meeting or probably realistically the following board meeting.
Or,
So we have plenty of time to review it.
Here's where like the financial, as a committee of 3, that we could review it
Sure.
and then make a recommendation whether to
That-
approve it and
that sounds
bring
good.
it to the entire board.
Yep.
So we don't have to do this as a committee of the whole again.
So, yeah, I will do my best to take everything that we've discussed over the course of the last couple of meetings.
Thank you.
Distill it down, make the revisions. I'll share it with Steve initially to make sure that we match up. He can review some of the stuff that I can't, like executive director duties. And then once we feel like we've got a good draft, then we can obviously circulate it and go from there with comments and other changes or whatever.
May I bring one more thing up?
Yep.
In section 2.3.1, Commissioners Conference, Seminar Fee Expense Reimbursement, commissioners will be granted an annual maximum allotment of $500 to be used for registration fees. Can we modify that because registration fees are more than $500 for?
Yeah, the whole section needs to be modified to be consistent with the Local Government Travel Expense Reimbursement Act, and there's a whole statutory framework now that has to be.
So Andrew was going to put all that in.
The whole thing will
And I
change.
think you guys probably have an existing policy that's just standalone separate, but yeah, that'll all get updated.
Okay, and actually, that reminds me too, because I have one other, I do have one other question. Should we include the Park District's mission statement as part of the board operations manual? Or like the,
I guess what I would say on that score, since we haven't reviewed the mission statement as a group, I think we should probably have a conversation about it rather than just putting it in. If we're going to add it, I think we should again review it and make sure that, I mean, I hate mission statements, excuse me. I didn't say that. I'd like to withdraw that from the minutes,
late.
please.
Okay, so,
late.
but potentially, if we review it and we agree on the mission statement, do we want to include that in the board operations manual? I tend to think it would be a good idea.
I think it should be plastered everywhere.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Right.
yeah, and remind President.
I definitely agree with that, but I do think that could be part of sort of an overall strategic planning process as we look at mission and vision and goals. And so would putting it into this document allow us the flexibility to review
Well,
and revisit that?
I mean, if we're going to be revisiting the document every 3 to 5 years, it would potentially be, could be amended. That would be part of the potential revisions to the board operations manual. But I just think, I suppose,
And it's a fairly minor point, but going back to Lindsay's comment, I think we are hoping to undertake a strategic planning process. I think we're going to be talking about that at the next board meeting and talk about a timetable. And as a part of that process, we might be revisiting the mission statement. So I guess I would, it's a minor thing for us to change the document again, but I think for us to update this document and then perhaps have it outdated a few months down the road because we then change the mission statement, why don't we just wait till we go through the strategic planning process, and as a part of that process, we could perhaps include it. But philosophically, we should plaster the mission statement everywhere. I think we all agree to that.
I just think of, so I just kind of think just as for policy, it's good to have that mission statement in our operations manual. Then, it may not really be necessary, but it's just a good policy to have that there and that for people to be reminded of it. So just, all right.
I guess I have one last thing. I think to sort of put a bow around this, I think that, at the start of this board term, there was a lot of confusion and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that prior boards didn't follow our organization document for whatever reason. And I think I've said a number of times that we should follow the document, and if for some reason we disagree with the document, we should change the document. So I think it's phenomenal that we have now gone through that process, and we've changed and updated the document so it's consistent with our practices. And now we should make every effort to follow the document, not just this board, but subsequent boards. And again, if and when it's appropriate to update it, whether it's on a 3 to 5 year schedule, if there's some reason to do it more quickly than that, philosophically, the two should be aligned with each other. And the fact that they had not been did create some confusion for us as a group and in the community. So we want to avoid that moving forward. So thank you, Cecilia, for taking us through this process.
And that's why I think having a regular schedule for
Makes all the sense in the world. I
makes
agree
a
with
lot
you.
more sense, because things do change. Okay.
Yep.
So,
I move to adjourn.
I second.
okay, all in favor? Aye.
Bang
We
that
are
gavel. Come on,
adjourned.
here we go.